You do not want to be under muscle. And that is clear from a longevity perspective, your immune function, metabolic function, blood glucose regulation, recovery, energy throughout the day, perceived energy. All these things are going to be compromised by insufficient muscle.
Risk of frailty, fractures in the future.
Huge.
Quality of life in general.
All of it. And the things you care about now, like I said, the things that are making you have low energy, low recovery, are going to be affected by those things right now. So you don't want to be significantly and seriously under-muscled. Once you get to a certain point, that number tends to look like something like 20, 21 in terms of a fat-free mass index. And for women, that number is a little bit lower, like 18-ish, starts to break. And then from there, when you add more muscle mass, you don't increase your risk. It just sort of stays.
Andy, I cannot believe you're here. I mean, this is just such an honor to have you here. I've listened to you for years, your YouTube videos. Basically it was my guidebook for how to use the gym, how to use weights, how to run on the treadmill for so long. And it's just so incredible to be here talking to you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Oh man, it was quite the compliment. I'm very excited to be here. I'm honored to be here and looking forward to it.
That's fantastic. So, Andy, I'm going to start off with just a few rapid fire questions for you, just so we can kind of frame up the conversation. So what's your favorite thing to talk about in the whole world of like health, wellness, longevity, health span?
What I'd probably say would be either a combination of the projects we're working on for the, I'll say, advancement of human performance. So what are some of the next level technologies and where I think this stuff is going? The other part of that answer would be similar to your guys' work in the sense of, we'll call it precision.
Right.
So precision training, precision nutrition, precision, really understanding this idea we've said a lot to the public, which is, figure out what works for you. Right. But how? Right. And now we can actually have tools and ways to solve that problem. And so I think we did a good job for years telling people to, figure out what works best for you, but we didn't tell them how to do that. And now we have the ability. So those two topics, the highest level, are the most interesting.
Those are two of my favorite topics. I'm going to dive into specifically the second one too, because what I find seeing people at Next Health, I have, a few hundred patients here, is everyone is a completely different individual biology.
Man.
Right? And like what works for one person, like you can, I'm sure you see this a lot. You send one person to the gym to do one set of exercises and someone that looks exactly like that person, it just doesn't work at all, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I can go a long ways into this because this is everything from when we do studies in our laboratory.
Right.
And we have left the model many, many years ago. That is, we take everyone in the study, we combine all the results together and report a group average. That is fine at the population level. That is fine to get rough ideas. But at the individual level, what happens to the person on this end of the spectrum and that end of the spectrum, right? Yeah. Somebody was a hyper responder, somebody was a low responder, and scientifically not a big deal. It's averaged out. But when you actually start coaching, when you start working with people, when you start trying to change your own individual health, whether or not you're on this end of the spectrum or that end or that bell curve in the middle, that is everything. And so I think my experience, both running my research labs as well as coaching the thousands of people we have coached, left me going, well, wait a minute. Like scientifically, that's okay. Coaching-wise, that's not. Coaching-wise, anecdote one by one is not good enough. We need to know real objective. So how do we actually blend this field together? And so our studies always report group averages as well as individual data. And so people can parse that out. So in general, I feel like that's what I've been going after for a long time because it's the only way we can get real answers. Science can do some things, but it's limited. Practical coaching, clinical experience is the same. Now, how do we combine the strengths of both of those to give people the best possible answers in their own individual journeys?
That speaks to exactly, I do a lot of speaking engagements as well. And one of the first things I show, one of my first slides is that bell-shaped curve, right?
Yeah.
You need to know where you are in the bell-shaped curve. You need to run a randomized controlled trial on yourself.
Yeah.
So you know, and exactly what you were saying is how do you do that with precision? Without the data, there's no way to know where you fit on that bell-shaped curve. So I'm going to get into that with you here in a bit. But what's one thing that you wish everyone knew, all the listeners of this podcast, your podcast knew about, let's just say exercise physiology in general?
I would say you have more control than you realize. And that is a fundamental theme across nutrition, across sleep, across your mental health, anything. There's plenty of factors that are out of your control. Great. If you look at the progression of science in the field of human performance, exercise physiology, call it what you want, more and more of it just continues to suggest that you have more control. Whether you're looking at all-cause mortality risks, whether you're looking at obese, you name the factor that is of most interest to you, and what you're going to find is your individual regulation is higher than you think. That doesn't mean you're completely at fault. It's shame on you. How dare you? That's not what we're getting at. Right. It is really suggesting, saying there's actually a path here. And so as we get into some of these details later, and we'll probably at some point talk about the advanced ways we work with people, and I know you do as well, fine. And we do that, and that's what I love. That's my passion, is what I said a second ago. But I always, always, always want to make sure people really understand you do not need any of that stuff. You can have a ton of success. You can look great. You can feel great. And you can perform great with just the basics.
Right.
Everyone can. Lifestyle, great relationships, high quality foods, so on and so forth. That's as complicated as it ever has to be.
Right.
And so I really don't ever want anyone to the level of thinking, unless I can afford X amount of dollars or services, then therefore I can have no control of my health. Right. And I never, ever want people to be in that position. So that is the thing I think is most important for people to understand. You do not need my services. You don't need your services. Right. Nobody ever has to pay $1 to live reasonably well. That said, the world is a lot easier now with some of the services that are available for people to get really high quality answers if they struggled to get them in the past. So I know that's a bit of a juxtaposition, but I really don't want to ever make people feel like they're trapped into thinking, if I don't have this ultra high precision physiology testing, then therefore I'll never know what to do. And that's not the case.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a great point, because I feel like people get a lot of paralysis by over-analysis. Like they'll listen to like 30 podcasts, follow 10 influencers, and they hear all this stuff about lactate threshold testing and VO2 max. And there's like, I don't even know where to buy a lactate meter at. How am I going to, I'm not even going to gym and run at all, or 100%. I'm not going to go out for a walk, right? Yep. And I run into that a lot with my patients. Like, look, let's just take it back a step. Just go for a walk today, you know?
Totally. So that's actually, okay, so I want to say this a little bit more directly, because you brought up a fantastic point. If you're at the start of this journey, and you're going, I got $300, I got $1,200, I got $6,000. Okay, fine. A lot of people really struggle to go, well, do I buy the watch then? Do I hire the trainer? Do I get the sleep study done? Like, which thing do I pick? And I really want to make people understand you don't have to make a selection there. You can get going on walking. You can get going on eating high quality, high carb. No, don't worry. That's not the biggest factor you have, right? Can you get routine and patterns and habits? And I'll give you, this is one of our like secret hacks here. All the people that I've coached, and we continue to coach, and you're talking about professionals in every major sport, Cy Young winners, world champions, MVPs, all pros, the highest contracts in the NFL, Major League Baseball's, executives, $100 million, billion, like all these people we've coached. All of them have one thing that we do no matter what. And that is step number one, you have to establish patterns. I don't care. Am I on the best diet that is specific to my physique? No, don't care. Are my macronutrients? No, don't care. So don't care. Quiet the system first, like we would run any study. Control as many of the variables as you can. Whatever ones they are, you pick them. If that means you're only controlling one thing, fine. If all you can manage because of your financial limitations or your technical limitations or your just mental resources going, man, I'm so overwhelmed. Great, pick one thing and make that consistent. Your physiology will quiet down, and then you'll start to see signals versus noise really easily. And we can worry about optimization, which is what you and I like specialize in, later. Just start with the basics, and we'll figure out even disagreeing on the basics later. But step number one is find something that you're going to stick with and move and repeat. And then we'll dial things in later.
Right. You know, whenever I see patients here in the clinic, before we even launch into any health advice, the first thing I want them to do is to become a habit-forming expert. Become an expert at forming habits. And I find that more than, I would say 70% of people, somewhere between 60 to 70% of people, don't even have a single consistent good habit in their life.
Yeah.
Right?
I do not care about the microplastics, the toxins coming off your frying pan. It's like, what time do you go to bed? I don't know. Great. When are you eating throughout the day? We don't know.
Right.
Okay. Like, we have things to get to for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm not putting an environmental scanner in your bedroom and scanning for toxins if we can't even agree upon, do you work out or not?
Right.
Like those are way, way, way. And I think that is a good use of majoring in the minors.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Those things are real.
Yeah.
They are factors. We do account for them. Right. You account for them. But those are steps.
Way down the line.
way
long
down
tail,
the line.
Right.
Long tail for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, getting people to really hone in on the concept of the Pareto principle.
Yeah.
Where's the 20% of the information when you need to spend 80% of your energy? I think that should be a theme of this podcast talk today. Let's make that a theme too.
Perfect.
Because I think that way, I think people like to get that paralysis by too much information, and they really don't know what that 20% of that information is. So I think if we can kind of hone in on that today, that would be awesome.
Great.
Awesome. Okay. So speaking of habits, what is one or two or three habits that you try to instill in many of your clients, or you think most people should do in their health and wellness journey?
Yeah, of course. It's going to sound like the basic life pyramids, if you will.
Okay.
Right. So habit number one, there has to be some sort of physical practice.
Right.
Now, we will differentiate almost always between physical activity and structured exercise. Mm-hmm. This is as simple as, what we don't want is somebody who sits all day in a chair. They go to the gym, they work really hard for 45 minutes, and then they remain in the chair. You knock the exercise part out, but the physical activity, your movement throughout the day, you're walking, very low. The opposite, okay, I walk, I take the stairs, but I never exercise. Okay, great. Neither one of those are the place to be in. And so we want basic movement. This can be a step count. Right. This can be, are you taking more meetings, standing up and down? Who knows, right? This is all the great work that I'm blanking on the name, but Kelly Starrett and Juliet's the studies they've done with the kids and things like that they've been a part of. Can you just move around a little bit, right? And then at the same time, now when we get to our exercise, there's got to be some structure there, progressive overload, some intentionality. What are we doing? So physical activity and exercise would be pillar number one, and those habits are going to be set, right? So how are we making a habit so that we're moving, and how do we make it a habit so we're getting our structured exercise in? Mm-hmm.
Great. So on that, what you're really doing is talking about separating physical activity into these two kind of buckets. One is the elimination of just sedentary behavior, right? That's what you're referring to, moving throughout the day. And then the other bucket is the intentional physical activity of actually exercise.
Yep.
Right? And so everyone needs, what you're saying is everyone needs both.
Yes, sir.
Okay, got it.
And this can be in every flavor that you could possibly imagine, right? This can be, okay, your current theme of mine, like my wife at home, we have 2 little kids. Great. Her physical activity is just keeping children alive. She's getting countless steps, running them up and down. Okay, so she just really has to pay attention to her structured exercise, because the physical activity is going to account for itself. Sure. I am almost the opposite, because most of my day when I'm wrangling my kids plenty of times too, but not nearly to the extent she is. I'm going to be sitting. Right? I'm sitting in front of a computer for the most part. I have to go out of my way to make sure I'm moving. Mm-hmm. That is a habit I have to do. That's not a habit she has to do, because it's going to get taken care of, okay? So I am also much more likely to get a Saturday night lift in, to do where she's like, Saturday night, she's like, I ain't lifting weights. No. Like, no way, right? Okay. But I'm like, I'm free. Kids or whatever, like, I'm going to go lift weights. Okay. So we have different problems is the point I'm getting at. And so where I need to make habits and where she needs to make her habits are different for them. Depending on your age, demographics, our goals, our past histories, what part of our training phase, all of these flavors can be different, but there has to be some account for both ends of the spectrum. And I don't think we really have anybody, with the exception of maybe some of our professional athletes, who are only focusing on training, which does happen pretty consistently. But most people, we're going to want both.
Right, absolutely. And to that point, getting people moving, that's one thing, but let's talk about like going to the gym, exercise. Well, it doesn't have to even mean going to the gym, just getting an exercise routine in. I have a lot of patients that haven't exercised either their entire life or they've, had a gym routine maybe when they're in college and it's fallen off. And I think the general kind of way that they've been spoken to by their primary care physicians is you need to go to the gym. So they'll go to the gym and just show up there one day, right? Yeah. So I see a lot of mistakes being made there. So what is your feeling like that type of person I just talked about? They haven't exercised in a long time. They first get into a program. Top 1 or 2 or 3 things. What mistakes are these people making?
Sure. Yeah. Number one, I will always take a poorly designed exercise program over no exercise at all. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good here. Just get going, just get trying, okay? If that means you have to show up to the gym, you don't know what you're doing, and you sit on some machines and you just use the machines, fine. I will take that as a better alternative to sitting at home. I never want to make exercise feel like it is so complicated that we are dissuading people from even going because they're just like, wow, no way. It's like if you said you have to run all your finances by yourself, good luck with your taxes. You'd be like, I'm just not starting. No. Like there's just no way. It's just too overwhelming, right? Great. Just get something done and I'm happy you're there. Now, once that part is handled, I also want people to remember, if you're going to the gym or working out or going to Pilates class or spin class or whatever it is, right? Gym is not even maybe a great example of it. Right. Jiu-jitsu class for the first time, who cares? You have to remember the overwhelming majority of the people that work there see people like you every day. You are the norm. You are not abnormal. You are the most common thing they see. So when you walk in that day and you feel horrifically embarrassed and ashamed because you haven't worked out in 20 years and you don't know what you're doing, and you feel like, oh my gosh, everyone there is going to ridicule me either directly or they're going to look down. You have to realize you are the actual normative thing that they see. The most common thing that they see is you.
Wow. So true.
Someone coming in super jacked or trained really hard is the uncommon.
It's the uncommon
thing, right? So you're the norm. They have seen you 15 times today, 50 times this week, and 3,000 over their year. Okay, this is what they've seen. So I would not hesitate to go up to the person working there the first time and just give them the honest, I have not worked out in 10 years. I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help me please get started? Everyone who works at a gym or spin class, they're going to be like, oh, I got you. Don't worry about it. Like, we'll get you sort of cruising. So that's my top piece of like what to do because people want
I love that.
To sort of help.
Yeah.
Now, if you're maybe a level above that, okay, and you're like, what are the kind of common mistakes? Well, we need to think less about specific protocols, exact rep ranges, and rest intervals. We can cover some examples.
Yes.
And you want to think more categorically. What am I trying to do today? Am I trying to simply burn calories because I'm primarily interested in fat loss? Okay. In that case, your options are really, really high in terms of what do you do? What can you do that keeps you healthy and motivated to progress? So mistake number one, I would say, is people doing things that result in them getting hurt.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
Do not get hurt. If you look at long-term research on physical activity, by far, the most progress will be made from people who are simply the most consistent.
Right.
Doesn't mean you can't take a week off and go on vacation. You got sick, you got lazy, and that happens. But if you look at this over the course of not this week, this month, but what happened over these 20 years, you don't want a month gone here, 4 months gone there because you tore an Achilles, back got thrown out. Like that's what you have to avoid for the long-term success. So your ability to keep that weight off for 20 years, to keep that muscle around for 50, this is the central driver there is going to be, can you just maintain yearly consistently, not daily, weekly, but over the years, can you be consistent? So do not get major injuries. Number two, you want to have some intention of what you're doing. In other words, this in exercise science speak, this would be progressive overload. So are we doing the same workout with the same reps, same intensity every day for years? And then we're wondering why we're not progressing. Okay, I don't even need to run the analogies there. You know why that's not going to work. So there has to be some judicious, intentional progression of again, volume, duration, length, intensity,
Exactly.
tons of ways we can play that game. But there's got to be some sort of movement forward if we want to continue to sort of move forward. So if I had to give you my top sort of 2, those would be it. Making sure we stay injury-free, and then 2, having some intentional progression.
That's great. Absolute great advice. Would you add to that for the person that does have a consistent routine, pretty good at the gym, not going to get injured, would you add some kind of focus on recovery too? Because I see a lot of people not really doing any type of recovery at all. They go straight from the gym right to work. Is there some recovery that you recommend?
Yeah, we can get into some tactics, like specific tools and things like that in a second. But what we generally do is we put everyone through what we call a quadrant system.
Okay.
So imagine you have 4 quads, and I give you 10 points total. Okay, and you get to split these 10 points up across those 4 quadrant areas, however you'd like. So you can put 10 in 1 and 0 and 0 and 0. You can put 3. You get the example, okay? Now, those 4 quadrants are going to be quadrant 1 is your physical activity practice.
Okay.
Maybe that's your walking. Maybe that's your lifting, your surfing, whatever it is you do for physical activity and exercise. We're just throwing it all together, and however you define those terms is quadrant 1. Quadrant 2 is going to be your what we call business, your finance, your resources, your profession, whatever you do, okay? Quadrant 3 is going to be your relationships. Could be love interests, could be friends, could be you like to go out, whatever it is you define relationships to be. And then your 4th is recovery. And again, recovery could be mental recovery. So for an introvert, that might just mean I need alone time. It could be physical actual recovery. My legs are sore. Could be sleep. Could be whatever our things, right? So you got 10 points you get to spread across those 4 categories in total. Well, it's hard to be at less than 2 or so in business, right? Like most people have to work.
Pay your bills.
Gotta work. Okay. Honest reality is that tends to be somewhere between 3 to 5. Right. Okay. We'll say it is 3, just to make an example. That's about the lowest it really, unless you've exited a company.
Yeah.
You got it. So let's say 3. We got 7 left. Now, you love to work out. You train hard. Okay. Do you put as much into that as you put in your business? Probably not. Let's say 2. Okay, great. And then what about relationships? Well, yeah, I like to go out. Okay, great. And I put 3 there. Well, I go 3, 3, and 2. Now all of a sudden I'm up to 8. That means I would have 2 left for recovery. Nobody does that.
Right.
Nobody does that. So what ends up happening is business ends up being 5 or so. Relationships are like, well, I got kids or whatever. That's going to be another 2 or so. Training is 2 or so. And now we're up to 9, 10 right out the gates, right? Yeah. The rule we have on that is recovery can never be less than half of your exercise and training. So if you put 3 into recovery or into exercise, we cannot put 1 into recovery. Wow. If we put 4 into exercise, we have no less than 2 to place in recovery. If you do that, you're not going to survive. It's very unlikely. And so what that means is we say, okay, great. Maybe this is simply a function of your recovery is not getting enough time. You just aren't giving enough hours to sleep. That's all we have to do. And so I don't need you don't need to go buy a $3,000 light therapy thing. You simply need to give yourself 45 more minutes to sleep, major and the minors, right? Or we need to not go from arguing on Wall Street all day, leaving that, driving straight home, doing a maximum heart rate 45-minute session, coming home, dealing with our kid, and then trying to fall asleep and wondering why we have trouble falling asleep. So we're talking nonsense here. That's one example of going, hey, we have got to have some intentional downregulation. But another example would be the opposite. Very low stress life. My physical activity is restorative. I like to do yoga. I like to do breath work. Well, that person doesn't need any additional downregulation. Yeah. When they're sore from exercise, I don't need you to downregulate more. I need you to actually build up more resilience. Your problem is you're not actually stressing the system enough, frequently enough, and you're getting more sore than you need to be because you're not resilient enough, or we actually need to bring in exercise tools, or we most likely, at that case, honestly, you've got some suboptimal thing happening physiologically that's compromising recovery. Those shouldn't be happening at that point. So we would look at recovery from that entire perspective of saying, what is the overall physiological, psychological, balance. It's the allostatic load, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly, you know what I mean by
Right.
that. It's the science word for the fact that all stressors are kind of created equal, right? So you got to bring them all in, add them all up together. And then we're going to look at how many of those stressors are what we call visible or versus hidden, and make sure your equation's not overfilled. That's the key to recovery, honestly.
Man, that's such a powerful way of thinking about it. Such a powerful model to really get into people's head for you as a trainer, but also for them to have the realization, like, I'm not putting anything into recovery, or just maybe it's all recovery, you know?
We get this all the time.
Yeah.
And we look through it and we're like, what are you doing for recovery? And they're just like, And then we're like, then why did you pay me all this money?
Exactly.
What are you doing? You're not even trying. I guess, like, we'll go try something. Oh, great, it worked. I'm like, shocking.
Man. That's so amazing.
Like, really commonly, you're like not even attempting to do it. So
wow, that's a great way to look at it. I'm going to start using that as well, with your permission, of course.
Yeah. Well, the quadrant, in fairness, I stole from my friend Kenny Kane up here in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
So I stole it from him. You're welcome to steal it from me.
Great. Love it. All right, so that was fantastic. Great way to kick this thing off. So let's do this. Let's look at that bell-shaped curve of people just in general, okay? And I see this in my practice, and I think you're probably seeing a lot more on the performance side, right, of people. But what I would say, if you look at the bell-shaped curve, kind of on the left, you have the people that are completely sedentary, probably about 16% of the population, totally sedentary, haven't worked out, I would say, 10, 15 years. They might be obese. That is also playing into their psychology of exercise and movement. And so, that is group one. Group two, I would say, is you have the people that are maybe doing a class once or twice a week. They fall off when they go to vacation, and they take a long time to get back into it. And, they're pretty much new to the gym, okay? Group three being I would put myself in this group, which is I have a regular routine at the gym, okay? And through listening to you, I have a very varied exercise routine, but I find most of my patients, they're either, like Peter Attia describes them as either muscle heads, I think, or cardio fiends, right?
Yeah.
Or they're either like one or the other. So I want to get into a little bit about like exercise diversity for longevity and health span. And then group four is like more of the athletes, like the people that are running marathons 3-4 times a year. Maybe they're doing triathlons, et cetera. I see those as well. And I have different questions about each group for you.
Killer.
Okay. And so
that was nice.
I think we can just kind of like get into a lot of these different groups, because I think almost everyone can put themselves into one of these groups. And so we can go down the rabbit hole on these. So first I want to talk about just testing. I am a huge fan of doing some testing on my patients, just because I feel like, number one, it establishes kind of where you're at right now, but also helps you kind of plan where you need to be and what direction you need to take. And so in the world of physical activity and exercise, what are some like the basics tests that if someone wants to invest maybe a few $100, they can go get some basic tests that you could look at and help them kind of directionality wise figure out like where they need to go and where they're at right now?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, but a little caveat before we get going on this one. I have been a part of many world championships in many sports without spending $1 on testing.
Amazing.
Right? Olympic gold medalists, world champions in many, many sports without a drop of blood taken, without a single technology bought. Okay.
Right.
That said, I don't do any coaching of any kind anymore without extensive and comprehensive testing. That's how I roll, but I do want to make sure, again, people understand I've won world championships without $1 being spent in these areas, okay? So you do not need this stuff. Yeah. You and I argue, though, that life gets a lot easier once you have this. Yeah. So, okay, if you want to play in that low end of the spectrum, what we would generally say, because you have these big buckets that go into what I will continue to call human performance, but I want to clarify, when I say that, I'm not talking about sports. I believe if you have a body, you're an athlete, which is my fancy way of saying you all want to look a certain way. It's different for you and I. Some want to get big and small. Okay, fine. You all want to feel a certain way. You define that differently than I do, and you do, and you do. Great. And you want to perform certain ways. Great. You still want then your body to perform. we're after the same game. When I'm working with somebody in our coaching practice, whether they are one of our competitors, actually in any of those 4 areas, because we have coached, and it's funny, those numbers you mentioned, because of the people that we've worked with, it's probably about that same thing. Probably
Really?
15 to 20% of our people that we've coached, like, do not exercise, do not do anything. And then that bell curve runs up, and probably 15 to 20% are the 40 to 70-year-olds who are running triathlons, Ironmans, and
it's a very similar patient population.
super common, right?
Yeah.
Really, really common. So within that bell curve, you're still wanting to perform, though. Everyone wants to feel the most energy. You want to have the most mental focus. You want to have the least amount of GI distress. Like, that's all asking your body to perform. Whether the person on the right side of the bell curve uses that ability to run a race, or the person on the left uses that ability to just feel better all day, it's the same physiology.
Absolutely.
You and I are taking people in the same exact direction. So I always want to make a point of that, because people send it to kind of hear some stuff, and they think if they're not in category 4, that this advice doesn't apply.
Right.
And it does. It is the same physiology, okay? So number one, we never, ever take somebody through a minimal amount of testing. I would never, this is not the found we've had. Sure. But that said, I would look at all these buckets that go into performance: your sleep, your stress management, your nutrition, your exercise, whatever else we could come up with, and we could split hairs on how we make extra categories. And I would ask you, intuitively, what do you think is the biggest, what we'll call, performance anchor? What's the area that's holding you back the most? And then give your $300 to $400 to testing in that area. If you think you're eating well and you're sleeping well and your training is good and your mental health is great, but somehow you're still not getting any progress in the gym, you're still feeling low energy throughout the day, you're still whatever it is, right? Then maybe that's time to spend those $300 or $400 on a micronutrient test.
Right.
On some next level thing. This is not our first line of thing I would do with the average person. Maybe this is one of your toxin tests. Like, this could be some other thing there. Like, maybe there's something going on. Great. Okay. Another scenario would be maybe something like, everything is great, I'm dialed, but my sleep isn't there. There are conflict of interest here. My sleep company, we do this, right? For a couple of $100, you can run a full FDA-approved clinical sleep study from your bedroom for a few $100.
Incredible.
Put your money there, right? But the same token, if someone's like, no, I sleep, my energy's phenomenal, I sleep all night, then maybe that's not the place to spend your $400 if that's the cap. Maybe, and I'm using you, Doc, as an example, maybe you got all that checked off, but you're not making progress in the gym. Your $400 might be better spent hiring consult from a high-level strength and conditioning coach. You can go, let's take your really good training program and let's make it great, because it was good enough to get you here. It's not good enough to get you to that next level. And so my advice would be, if you're at that kind of price point limitation, think about what is that most severe anchor you've got, as best as you can tell, and then put your money into the things with the highest fidelity and the most feedback that can help you move forward. So that would be my recommendation, regardless of which one of those 4 buckets of people you've talked about are in, by the way.
Yeah, that makes total sense, actually, because, obviously a lot of this stuff costs some money, and you definitely want to spend it on the right things. And it's different for every person. Once again, we keep talking about how everyone's so different.
Yeah.
Focusing on that is super important. So what if you did just come to you as a client, and what's your base level testing package kind of include to get a good sense of where this person is?
Yeah, so we do a couple of different things. So our coaching program is called Rapid Health and Performance.
Okay.
And we don't offer baseline. There's one package there, and it is everything.
Right.
And the reason we do that is we've done this enough. And the model honestly was built on many, 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 many years of us working with athletes and going, okay, you're going to do 1 or 2 tests. And then 6 weeks from now, you're going to come back and add another one. And then 6 weeks from now, we're going to add another one. And we're going to add another one anyways. And we don't have 2 chances at the Olympics. You got 1 chance to make that NFL roster the first time, right? We have 1 contract year, whatever. And do you really want, no, you know what I'm going here.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
No.
It never is. And so we are always going to say, look, if you have more money than you have time, or you cannot afford to miss, what would that look like? And so that's the program we built. And we said either one of those two cases exists where somebody has to get it right. And so we end up saying, look, I want to collect obnoxiously comprehensive data. Some of it will be unnecessary. But the problem is I don't know what part is unnecessary. Yeah, right? By doing that, we're then able to give very high precision, simplified plans because we can confirm, you know what, it wasn't this. We never get in a situation where like, well, we're seeing signs of A, B, and C. Well, we'd have to go confirm. We don't want to be in that situation. We don't have time to then come back 30 days later and do another draw, right? Our NFL off seasons are short. NBA, Major League Baseball off seasons we don't have time to 60 days later, well, let's try and see, right? Let's see what happens with this protocol and come back. Like, we don't have those. Even our I keep using athlete examples, but I shouldn't have to. Our non-athlete ones. It's the same thing. It's like, I got to close this business deal. I got to do this. Like, I have to be, I'm in pain. I'm in fatigue. Like, I can't, I'm losing money. Great. Like, we have to solve this problem now. So what we do is all of those areas. Our process actually takes about 2 months to collect the data.
Wow.
Some people go a little bit faster, but it's very similar, right? We're doing insanely comprehensive sleep testing. It's the in-home sleep stuff. It is environmental scanning, a ton of blood work specific to sleep-related variables, so on and so forth, right? Mental health for sleep, all that. It is urine, stool, saliva, hair if necessary, sweat testing for performance and hydration. We're looking at hundreds of individual blood biomarkers. But in addition to that, as you know, you can make hundreds of thousands of calculations and inferences on top of all those things. It is performance testing. It is strength testing. It is VO2 max testing, depending on what's going on with the person. It is full body muscle analysis. So we're using a technology called Springbok analytics.
This,
yeah, we can get a 3D volumetric image of every individual muscle on your body.
Wow.
With a 20-minute MRI scan that can be done anywhere in the country.
Incredible.
So we're not looking at, like, we're not medical, right? Yep. So we're not like you, we're not looking for pre-cancers and stuff, right? So when we have people that want that stuff, we send them to people like you.
Right.
We're not the medical side. But we want to see, like, why you keep having that knee pain? Well, let's look at, I want to know the individual size of your vastus lateralis on your left and your right, and so on. You get the idea, right? We're running this entire gamut up and down. Then we have, of course, things like respiratory tracking, breath work testing. You're going to work with our team of psychologists and mental health experts. And this is, I could keep going, but you're getting the point. Wow. It is all of this stuff and more and more and more. And then all those data get filtered through and they come back. And then we will analyze everything and figure out what are those 1 to 8 most severe performance anchors, and then give you a very specific program. And so it's not just like, hey, take these supplements and good luck. It is typically 6 or 8 months or so of guided, we're going to get to A, to B, to C, to D with your physiology so that we get a known outcome. So just like I would design a training program, that's not just like, do this workout every day.
Yeah.
See ya. We're not doing that with your nutrition. We're not doing that with your breath work. We're not doing that with your recovery or your sleep. Like, everything is built together so that our sleep program is not interfering with our training, or our training is not messing with the nutrition we're trying to get, or that's not messing with our downregulation. It's cohesively built so that we can get to a very direct and specific outcome. So because that is the goal, we don't do like a la carte, oh, add this and kind of add this or whatever. It is, we like to solve problems.
Yeah.
This is the only way we can guarantee it as much as possible. So that's really sort of all we offer for the most part at that company anyways.
I mean, that makes total sense actually, because like you said, these are athletes or maybe business people that have a little bit amount of time, and then you can't afford the time to do investigation and make mistakes.
Yeah, we can't wait a year to start feeling better.
Right,
like we have to get going now. So, I mean, that said, our sleep company, Absolute Rest, does have those, hey, if you just need to target sleep, you can go after those programs. Our blood work companies is like, if you just need to get the high performance blood work at Vitality, you can go to that. So we do offer those things at, much more equivalent price points, depending on what you're looking for. But like my personal coaching services, when you want like to work with me directly, that's what you're getting, is the full kit and caboodle. And there's no like a la carte there at all. It's, I don't want to miss anything. We want to give you the highest chance of success. And it is not for the faint of heart.
Right.
at all.
So in that, is there any DEXA scanning or using so the DEXA scan is a big part of this. And,
yeah, we can get, so you're going to get, of course, body composition, hydration testing, all those things. We're going to be able to get bone mineral density. We can get a lot of that on Springbok anyways.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to be able to get, so as opposed to only getting like total body composition and fat-free mass index throughout the whole body, since we're getting volume of every individual muscle, we can see exactly where that's being distributed and how and what that looks like. So,
are you getting bone density on Springbok as well?
Yeah, totally.
Oh, so it's like a super upgraded DEXA.
Yeah,
with much higher precision.
Totally. And sometimes we do both, depending on logistics. It's not always possible to get that on Springbok, but it will be soon. Yeah. So sometimes we have to do both, but yeah, as you know, like a DEXA is pretty easy.
Sure, absolutely.
At this point, but really informative.
Yeah. And then for your strength assessments, you're having someone actually test somebody with multiple different strength variables? Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and it kind of just depends. So, I mean, globally, we're going to look at something related to grip strength. We're going to look at something related to upper body strength. We're going to look at something related to lower body strength. And then, obviously, our athletes directly are getting different things. But the overwhelming majority of our people are not athletes in that program. That said, then they're getting a very comprehensive movement analysis. So we have folks on our team that are the highest level movement specialists, physical therapists in the world. And that's kind of our model is everyone in our team is world-class in their area. And so we kind of do this like what I call Voltron, but nobody knows what that means.
I know Voltron. I used to love that show.
Thank you. Like everyone's like, I'm not 40 years old. I don't know what that stupid cartoon is. But we want a super team, right? Like, absolutely. You know, you do the same thing with your team, right? Like you want every person in their individual specialty. So they're getting a movement assessment, movement analysis, like how are you moving? Not just how much can you lift or what's your VO2 max, but what's your position look like? Anything hurt? Why? How are you moving? And so that part of it is very well incorporated as well. So it's how well you're moving, why you're moving that way, what can you do, what are your limitations, all the metabolic data we're getting, caloric expenditure, resting metabolic, like all those data are coming in as well.
Amazing. Yeah, and I think, one thing you mentioned the STAR-Ets already. I have patients that, can't really afford to get a movement analysis. It's an expensive, long test. And like you said, you need a professional to do this for you. And I really like the STAR-Ets app, actually, that they have.
Oh, yeah.
They're built to move.
So all of
app.
our people get that app.
They do.
Yeah. We use Ready State.
I love it. The Ready State app is a great proxy for this, for testing yourself at home.
Yeah,
if you can't do the full movement analysis.
We actually were so stoked to get that on board earlier this year. It's not only like a diagnostic, but then it is an actual coaching tool. Like phenomenal.
It's so comprehensive. And I think, just double click on that a little bit. Almost everyone I meet ignores mobility as part of their overall routine, right? Yeah. You're laughing because you probably see the same thing. Man.
Like, again, we see the, advanced cases, my shoulder hurts, my neck, my back, whatever. And you're just like, all right, have you done anything? Like, well, I went to the chiropractor a couple of times. You're like, all right. Okay, nothing against chiropractic, but you know what I mean? Like that's not an active solution. Like you've been in pain for how many years and all you've done was these 4 chiropractic visits? Like there are better options. So we have seen a lot of, I'm sort of joking because I can't even tell you how many times we've seen I've been dealing with this for so many years. I've been to so many surgeons and doctors, and then like within a session.
Right.
we're done. And they're just like, what? I'm like, this is not even that advanced. This is like really, whether it's with Kelly Starrett stuff or Dr. Charlie Weingroff, we work with a lot, or other people. Like, I mean, we're not perfect. I'm not going to give you a false sense of we've cured everything in the world, but man, like a lot of that stuff can go away pretty quickly if you just have somebody that actually knows what they're doing.
Exactly, and it's incredible to me that when people come in with like some low back pain, the first thing they go to is, man, I want to see if I can avoid surgery. And it's like there's so many steps in between like experiencing back pain and then having surgery, right? And mobility is a huge part of it. Just getting and I ask them like, so tell me about your day. Oh, I sit in a desk 8 hours a day. That's where it's coming from. And like you said, a little bit of mobility work and the back pain's miraculously gone.
Totally.
And meanwhile, they've had 30 chiropractor visits.
Yeah, like for sure. For sure. I'm like, there's all your money right there.
Right. Absolutely. So, that mobility piece is super important for our listeners. And the app is amazing. Their book is amazing as well. I'm going to have them on as well.
Oh,
so,
great.
They're fantastic.
They're sweet.
On markers as well, just one more thing. For people to kind of follow along at home with their body composition, do you recommend bioimpedance scales, or do you, at least check like directionality?
Yeah. So you can do this a handful of ways, depending on what you're available to. Something like a DEXA scan, of course, is going to get you bone mineral density, body composition. So how much muscle you have as well as body fat. The three big variables.
Right.
How much bone mineral density, how much body fat, how much muscle. Okay, that's great. You got to treat those with a little bit of a grain of sugar, as I call it, because they are very subject, specifically the body composition, to acute changes in hydration. So if you didn't standardize that, and this is one of the other things we spend an enormous amount of time on, why our data collection takes so long. Data collected improperly are not only useless, they are oftentimes extremely harmful.
Right.
And so if you're not going to collect things well, then I would strongly encourage you to not collect them at all.
Right.
Right. You can really get false senses. I mean, you and I could probably have an hours long conversations with blood work. If you really don't know what you're doing in that area, you should absolutely just stay the heck out of it. And if you're not going to collect it correctly, just get out of there, right? Standardization is, it's actually one of the tips that nobody talks about with blood work.
Absolutely.
And it is everything. It will change your entire interpretation if you don't standardize your pre-blood work activities. But with hydration and body composition testing, it's actually not as extreme, but it is large enough such that you will, any amount of change you would actually realistically see in, say, 3 months can be masked or completely exaggerated by a hydration change prior to testing. Right. So make sure that that is really dialed as a word of caution. That said, once a year, right? That's probably maybe twice a year if you're really into this stuff, but once a year is fine for a DEXA. All the way at the end of the spectrum, if you want to do something like just testing your body weight every day, fine, because that is, as you said, going to give you directionality, right? Rough ideas. Now, we never necessarily worry about day-to-day changes. What you should more pay attention to, for most people, is the same day over the next and following weeks. Such as to say, don't ever compare Monday to Tuesday. Compare Monday to next Monday. And the reason I'm saying that is because people tend to have a roughly similar schedule throughout the week, okay? Which is to say, most people are going to be off on Sunday, as an example. Most people are probably not going to be, it's the least physical activity they're going to have throughout the day. They tend to relax the most, go to brunch, so on and so forth, right? And then Monday tends to be a very active day because you're right back in at your work, okay? So if you compared your weight Sunday to Monday, you're going to see those things as a result of very, very, very different patterns the day before. Your hydration status will be different. Your fiber intake will be different. So your gut composition will be different and your numbers will often. However, your Sunday to Sundays tend to be more similar than your Sunday to Monday. And your Monday to Monday to Monday tend to be really similar. So if you're looking at Sundays versus Sundays versus Sundays versus Sundays or Mondays versus Mondays, you get the idea here. You'll see really consistent patterns in your body weight on those days. And so if you're wondering how do you deal with this fluctuation, stack them vertically if you're looking at a calendar rather than horizontally day by days, right? Because you'll see these wild changes. So we look at it always vertically that way. So that is kind of like a daily metric one can do. If you want to actually get a scale that incorporates some sort of BIA into it, so you can get a rough idea of body composition, that's fine. But again, now you're really subject to hydration changes. So you want to make sure you're not, body composition will not meaningfully change for most people for weeks. So you really want to make sure you're tempering those adaptations. Right. If you want to meet somewhere in the middle and you have access to a place that has a little bit more of an upscale BIA device, so the ones at home, most scales $20 to $100, and they have some BIA in it. However, more advanced systems like an InBody are going to be several $1,000s. And we've actually done some validation research on my lab on that one specifically. And you probably aren't going to have that, but your fancy gyms, your health clinics probably do that. And so that might be something you could do once a month or whatever your routine is, and that gets you there. So a combination of those would be my recommendation. DEXA once or so a year, a more advanced InBody once a month to once a quarter, something like that would be reasonable if it's, something you have to pay for. And then simply checking your body weight, even like sometimes daily at home. And if some people have a problem with that, which that can be a negative thing a lot of times, maybe once a week or once every other week or whatever, right? We want to be careful of not causing issues there. But that's how I would kind of lay that spectrum out for body composition testing.
Yeah, no, that is perfect. And that's really along the lines of what I recommend for my patients. We do have the InBody at our clinic.
Oh, great. Yes.
Yeah, I love that machine. It does a pretty good job. It's not exactly on point with the DEXA, but like I said, directionality is what we really care about here.
Yeah.
There's the InBody H20N, which has the handlebars for home use. Have you ever evaluated that? Or
we did. We actually looked at, I think it was that one, the 720.
Yes, the 720.
And then there was maybe another model, and we compared that to probably 3 or 4 other equivalent devices, and we ran that against DEXA and the bod pod. For the most part, for the people we're talking about here, gonna be just fine.
Gonna be just fine, right?
All those things. Now, when we have to have our athletes, whether they're Olympic weightlifters or powerlifters or UFC fighters, and they have to make a certain weight on a certain day, level of scrutiny goes up.
Of course.
But for the vast majority of us, myself included, those products are going to be just fine.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so let's dive into a little bit before we start talking about individual patient protocols. Just some quick thoughts about 2 things. We talked about the importance of mobility. Let's talk about the importance of muscle and the importance of cardiovascular fitness, things like VO2 max, zone 2. We can dive in a little bit deeper into what those mean later. But let's talk about muscle health. Give us some high pointers on the importance of muscle health, why people need to think about it, and what are people doing right and wrong regarding muscle mass?
Well, I am a muscle physiologist at heart, so I will admit my massive conflict of interest in this particular answer. I will always bias muscle being more important than anything else.
You and many of our friends.
So, sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so one of the things you want to consider here, a couple of things. In terms of, if you want to look at the things that are going to predict how long and how well you're going to live, you're not going to find anything that trumps VO2 max and high quality muscle. Depending on the study, you'll find muscle to outperform VO2 max or the opposite. But globally, those 2 things are going to reign supreme.
And it's kind of like, just sorry to interrupt you there, but it's kind of counterproductive to compare muscle versus VO2 max. You really need both, right?
It's kind of like saying what's more important, my front wheel in my car or my back wheel.
Exactly.
No.
That's a great analogy.
This is not an either or thing.
Right.
Like this is you're not going to drive well without both of these things.
Exactly.
And I know we've done longevity research. We've done studies on lifelong exercisers in many of these things. So we've done things on, we did actually a twin study on monozygous.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is great. For translation, that means you have the exact same DNA, right? So if egg is fertilized and split into 2, you get to, it's a clone, okay? And so we no longer have what if their genetics was different question. We know that they are identical. However, they had 30 to 35 years of discordant physical activity patterns. So this is the ideal scientific study, right?
Awesome.
Complete genetic control over that. Well, the exercisers in this particular case were mostly steady state endurance type of exercises with no lifting compared to sedentary twin. And most of the things that you would predict were improved in the exercising twin: cardiovascular health, blood lipid markers, VO2 max, body composition, markers, all of it better. However, muscle strength, muscle functionality, performance, muscle quality as identified via imaging, all not any better or worse than the non-exercisers.
Wow, that's incredible.
And so, there's a number of conclusions to that paper, but one of them was simply that endurance exercise is phenomenally good for your health. It's tremendous. But if you don't also do strength training, you're leaving many physiological adaptations on the table. There have been many studies, again, on lifelong strength trainers, and you see the same thing. Great in a number of areas and limited in other areas. There's been lifelong endurance exercisers. We've done other work. I went to Stockholm, Sweden years ago and did research on cross-country skiers who have been training and competing in skiing since the 1940s and 50s and compared them to 80, these are all 80 to 90-year-olds, by the way, compared them to age-matched individuals who didn't compete in sports. Lots of improvements in VO2 max and other markers, equal if not worse muscle function.
Wow.
So the story is very, very, very clear here. You're going to want both of these 2 things on board. And so if we look at what's going to determine the most about how people look, feel, and perform throughout their life, give you the longest life, the most high quality life, health span, all this stuff. Number one is staying out of disease, right? So don't get cancer. Yeah. Great. Okay. I'm going to leave all that off the table. That's, Doc, your part of the equation. I'm not an MD. Okay. So from this side of the equation, what we're left with now is things like, okay, do we have an appropriate metabolic function, right? Is our metabolism running without major problems, right? What's that mean? Either completely compromised thyroid function, very low metabolic rate, extremely high fat utilization, or extremely high carb, some dysfunctional thing, right? Can it just be like, don't be terrible? Give me the bell curve here, right? That's all we have to be in this one. Can we have a functioning immune system, right? And then we get ourselves through the world, right? And that really, all three of those are going to be regulated by skeletal muscle. Yeah. Skeletal muscle is what's going to determine your ability to move throughout the world and to not get hurt. If your VO2 max, half that is skeletal muscle, right? There's a central and there's a peripheral component to that. Your VO2 max in general, we've already talked about. If you don't have enough muscle, we're going to struggle to support the immune system. We're going to struggle to support recovery. Metabolism is going to be compromised. And so, I could go on and on about these things, but globally, you don't have to have any specific phenotype from a muscle perspective. You don't have to look a certain way. You don't have to have enormous muscle or be a professional power lifter or weightlifter, but you just can't be in the bottom 25th percentile in terms of muscle size. In fact, one more, I know I'm going on for a while here. I could keep going, but this is a big question. Yeah. One of the things that you'll see sometimes in kind of like the longevity spheres, no offense, on these things, is people will say, okay, great. The data are really clear. If you have insufficient muscle on a male, you're typically looking at something like a fat-free mass index of like below 16. Okay. In females, it's a little bit lower, below 15, 14. But you're going to see hazard ratios, so likelihood of experiencing a poor health event or actual dying for any reason, okay? If you go from those numbers and you go lower, then your risk of that hazard ratio, those odds ratios just start increasing, like really high. So you're talking 2, 3, 4, 500-fold increases of risk, okay? If you go from, we'll just use the female example, FFMI of 14, and you go to 15, 16, 17, those risks just continue to go down. There's no step function here. It's not like down and it's even. It is just down, 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 down. Okay. Now, some people argue, based on very flawed interpretation of research, that if you get too much muscle, that curve turns into a U and it starts going back up. And that's some people who, no offense, but like really did not understand, in my opinion, basic physiology or statistical interpretation. But you'll see these published in medical journals. And this is really pervasive in the medical community. Yeah. That's why I'm so adamant about this one. And I'm not trying to offend, but this is a really important point that people as well as medical professionals need to understand. Now, we went back and myself and Tommy Wood, this is my colleague at the University of Washington, neuroscientist. He and his graduate student, Christy, led a project, and we said, hey, okay, let's go look at these large databases and really see what's going on with this, because those data didn't make any sense. Those publications came out. So we published this paper last year, 2023, I think it is. And one of the things we looked at was NHANES, which you're familiar with, right? So it's this national database of, I don't know, it's probably a 40-year-long study. Right. People from all over different facilities across the country, and they're done so that scientists can have access to big data sets and we can all share the data. Okay, that's a quick version.
Massive data dump, right?
Totally, right? And it's everything from IQ to food recalls to genetic testing and it's not a perfect data set by any means. No. It's just meant to be a starting place to help people get 3,000 people databases or 30,000 or whatever the case may be. Now, the UK did a similar thing a number of years ago and just finished it. It's called the UK Biobank. Yep. They got about 500,000 people in that, right? And more of these are coming. Yep. I know, friends, I'm getting very technical into the science here, but the reason what I'm explaining this is we went into that NHANES database and we looked at the people that had high muscle mass that was associated with advanced mortality, right? So what are these? Got too much muscle Right. And you know what we found with that group? You know what their relationship was between the amount of muscle they had and their physical activity?
They
It didn't exist.
Didn't exist, right?
Zero.
No physical activity, but still a lot of muscle.
Totally.
Mhm.
Which says, okay, you know what you really found? You found people who get a bunch of muscle, not from exercise, tend to die earlier. And you can figure out pretty clearly what that additional muscle came from.
Yeah.
And so we were able to look at that and say, hey, number one, by the way, we found that muscle quality, muscle strength, predicted 5% of cognitive variance.
Wow.
So I think that was leg extension test and IQ. Can't remember exactly if it was IQ, but it was nonetheless 5% of cognitive variance was determined by leg strength.
Makes sense, right?
And there was direct and indirect causes of that. So it's not just correlation, it was correlation and causation there. And so nonetheless, though, there was no association there between the higher amount of muscle mass and physical activity, which is to say that database is full of a bunch of people who I'll just say is not the avatar I'd like to be compared against.
Exactly.
And I mean,
yeah,
we could talk about the implications of that with things like interpreting blood work and
for sure
other massive problems. But that is not an issue to be concerned with. So to getting back to your point of muscle in general, you do not want to be under-muscled. And that is clear from a longevity perspective. That is clear from a right now perspective, your immune function, metabolic function, blood glucose regulation, recovery, energy throughout the day, perceived energy. All these things are going to be compromised by insufficient muscle.
Yeah. Risk of frailty, fractures in the future.
Huge.
Quality of life in general.
All of it.
Right.
And the things you care about now, like I said, the things that are making you have low energy, low recovery, are going to be affected by those things right now. So you don't want to be significantly and seriously under-muscled. I can't make a strong argument that you need to be super jacked. Like I would love to be able to make that argument, but I can't. Okay. And so in this particular cases, there's a little bit of a diminishing returns. Once you get to a certain point, that number tends to look like something like 20, 21 in terms of a fat-free mass index. By the way, that's easy to calculate. If you know your height and weight, you can go online and get your fat-free mass index calculator. Like if you want to know what this number is, not body composition rather, you have to know that. And for women, that number is a little bit lower, like 18-ish, sorts to break. And then from there, when you add more muscle mass, you don't increase your risk. It just sort of stays about the same, right? So that is one thing to consider. VO2 max, though, is not that way.
Right.
There is a lot of research going all the way back to Stephen Blair's work at South Carolina in the 1980s, Jonathan Myers' work at Stanford in the early 2000s and 1990s. Extensive data suggests that there appears to be no upper limit to the benefit of VO2 max on longevity, which is a scientific way of saying as you continue to increase your VO2 max, you continue to reduce the hazard ratio or odds ratios of dying for all-cause mortality. Benefits taper a little bit, but they don't stop like they do with skeletal muscle. So if we had to stack all these things up, the way that I would generally say it is this. Muscle mass is kind of number 3. You have to have some muscle mass. Mostly just don't be under-muscled, and I gave you those numbers and values a second ago.
Right. 18 for females and 21 or so for men.
Yeah.
Fat-free mass index.
After that, there's no additional benefit.
Right.
Kind of like if you slide down, what I'd say for females is you do not want to be below like 14. Like you really, really don't want to be below that. If you can get yourself up to 15, 16, that's sort of better. 18 would probably be the spot where I'd say, okay, if you don't want to work on this anymore, we don't have to.
Right. But you have to maintain.
You gotta
maintain.
Just you don't want to keep going backwards.
Right. Absolutely.
Which you know is going to happen with aging.
Right.
So
it's going to happen.
For sure it's going to happen, right? At a pretty predictable rate. Right. So actually one of the things that we do with our people is we actually not only measure those things, but then we can actually run prediction equations and tell them exactly where they're going to be when they're 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, however long we want to run that thing out. Sure. On top of muscle mass, the next one then would be muscle function.
Before you move on, I'm so sorry. I just want to get the numbers down for males too. Where do you like to see fat-free index for males? Yeah,
same thing. I'm doing this a little bit off the cuff here. So again, for a male, like I'm honestly really paying attention. If they're below like 17, I'm raising flags. I'm like, what's going on? If they're certainly below 16, this is going to be a very, very high priority for them. If they get above 21, 22, that's when I say, all right, if you don't want to work at this anymore, you can. But if it's below 21, you're going to be working on it.
You're going to be working on it.
One way or the other, right? Sorry, thank you for letting me finish that loop out. That said, muscle function is far more important than muscle size for the average person. And so what that means is if you look at things like, okay, how much risk reduction comes with muscle? A lot. How much comes with high strength though? Double, triple, quadruple that amount. So if you have to choose between enough muscle and enough strength, always choose functionality over pure size. And that makes sense. There's a relationship between muscle size and muscle function, but it's not overlapped.
Right.
It's not a perfect relationship either. So performance and size are disentangled at some end of the spectrum. Grip strength, leg strength, upper body strength, core strength, all those things really, really matter. And then we haven't even gotten into things like actual power, balance, which is a part of strength, stability. People always hammer me because I never talk about that. Well, I am talking about that. Part of strength is being stable. Right. You cannot be strong and unstable. That's not how it works, right? To a point. So, said differently, stability is strength.
Yes.
That means you're not moving when you don't want to move. You're stable. That's strength. So all this stuff factors in, and that is more important than simple size. So you can run a bunch of metrics on all that stuff, and depending on kind of the person, the population you're looking at, you might want to run different performance tests, but I would do those. And I wouldn't call VO2 max necessarily number one. I probably should have said this as muscle size is kind of like, or body composition in general is the baseline, and then VO2 max and muscle function are kind of 1A, 1B. Right? Because you have to have both of those two things. So you would want to run some diagnostic on that. If you were to run like a Springbok analysis once a year or a DEXA scan or whatever you're doing, get you in a rough spot. If you want to do some sort of performance test at least once a year, I would recommend probably twice a year, but once a year I can get away with. And the same thing with your metabolic test, VO2 max test. You could probably get away with that every 2 years if you needed to. Honestly, if you had to do it every 5 years, fine. I would love once a year. But you could go a little bit longer on that one if you needed to. So that's how I would generally break those up.
Yeah, well, that's such a great summary. And I think it really encapsulates for people just listening to this and doing this at home for themselves to do some sort of test where they can figure out their free fat mass index. And they can do that for free just with online calculators as well.
If they have a body composition test.
If they have a body composition test. And then, or get a DEXA. But that muscle size, you have a certain baseline amount you need to get to.
Yep.
But that does decouple at some point from muscle strength.
Yep.
And the muscle strength also needs to be tested with using things like grip strength.
Yep.
Maybe you can get online and find out what the standard is for your bench press, your leg press.
Yep.
And at least you know directionality where to aim for.
Yep.
And that's also super important.
Yep.
And then the last thing is VO2 max. And VO2 max, there's like metabolic testing you can do. You can approximate it with things like there's a Cooper's test. And
sure.
Yeah, there's other ways of getting your VO2 max.
Yeah, for all these things, there are surrogates, there are proxies, there are submaximal tests that can be done for all of it. And so depending on your limitation, I have a bad knee or I don't know how to do a leg press. Okay, fine. We can do that. If you can't get yourself up to a maximum heart rate, great. We can do a submaximal VO2 max test. We can do an estimator. The gold standard will always be the gold standard. Yeah. If you have the option, do the gold standard. If you don't, though, that's when some of these other metrics can get you in the stratosphere, right? They can get you somewhat close. We have honestly seen a lot of chicanery with metabolic testing recently. So be really careful with where you get these things done. Make sure the facility really knows what they're doing. They're calibrating their machines. And hopefully you can have conversations with the technician. They should know a little bit. They don't need to have a PhD in exercise physiology to run a metabolic cart. But we've seen a lot of data come back, and I'm like, nope, no way. Like zero chance that's real. We have them do it again, and the numbers are 20, 30 milliliters per kilogram different. And you're like, yeah. Wow. Okay. So really make sure you're getting, if you want to look, since we're on this point, some research laboratories and universities offer this kind of fee for service, typically somewhere between $50 to $250. Many don't, most don't. But then there's a lot of clinics that are popping up, and it's those facilities you need to be really, really careful of. It's buyer beware.
Right.
Honestly.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the test is only as good as the person administering it with this one especially.
Yeah. So if you're thinking like, yeah, I haven't really worked out in a while, I don't really train that much, then I got a VO2 max test done and I was in the 99th percentile, maybe it's possible.
Probably not. Right.
Probably not.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so on that point with VO2 max too, I just want to make one more thing clear. There's no endpoint to where VO2 max improvement doesn't lead to decreased mortality. So just keep working on it, right?
Yeah, there's no, like we never take that off our list unless we might oftentimes we'll deprioritize it if we're like, we've got 2, 4, 6 other things that are really substantial for you. The way that we kind of phrase it oftentimes is we talk about, do we need to rebuild or do we need to upgrade, right? And if we are looking across the entire analysis and we don't see any areas of rebuild and they have a particular reason or desire or joy of increasing, then we might say, okay, let's go for an upgrade in your VO2 max. But if we got 7 things that need to rebuild and they want to improve their VO2 max, we might actively tell them no. Right. No, especially if it's things like, hey, the type of training you're doing for your VO2 max is digging you further into a physiological hole, or our recovery metrics, our autonomic nervous system testing stuff, our respiratory rate or sleep, whatever is tanked, and we need you to back down. I would probably say 10 to 15% of our clients, we end up having to throttle back. And this is not even necessarily like those category 4 people you talked about. Yeah. Sometimes it's categories 1 or 2 or 3, and we're like, hey, what you need right now is a 25% reduction of sympathetic drive. Right. And we're going to do that for a month or 6 weeks. We got to get you reset to even get back into it. So it's not necessarily just the hard charging, high exercising folks. So yeah, if we have major rebuild stuff, we're going to prioritize those first. Yeah. If not, we're going to go for some upgrades.
It brings me to, even just this morning, I was in the gym and I saw this woman on the treadmill running at like 10 miles per hour for literally an hour and a half. I was like, she's burning herself out. This is nuts. And so I wonder about things like that, like people overdoing it sometimes.
Depends. Yeah. I mean, sometimes that can happen in 20 minutes. Sometimes an hour and a half is fine for some people. I mean, some of the high level endurance athletes we've worked with, 100 miles per week is not an abnormal week at all. And then others, 5 miles is a lot.
It's a lot, right? I'm seeing a lot of these biometric test devices like the Oura Ring and the watches now, an approximation of VO2 max. Have you looked into how close to accurate that might be or not accurate?
It depends on what question we're trying to answer, because the reality of it is where they tend to get lost is when your numbers tend to be good to great. And so if you are fairly poor in your VO2 max, the number is going to get okay. But at high heart rates, they tend to get screwy. And at high VO2 maxes, they tend to get screwy.
Got it.
I get asked this question 50 times a day, and I always don't answer it. Because I'm like, again, I don't want to actually make things like this. I don't want to make the barrier so high people are just like, I don't know what to do.
Absolutely.
But the reality of it is, those technologies are going to get better.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely.
They're going to get better. They have just continually done that for many, many years. I have full faith that they're going to get better. But right now, here's how I'll say it. We don't do that in my practice.
Right. But at least directionality for people that are in the poor or to the, average VO2 max, if they're trying to improve it, at least directionally it could be helpful. No, not even?
Well, no, I mean, yeah, it can. But like what it is I'm getting really technical with the technology, because it's things like if they tend to start sliding on your wrist during a test and they get off to a slightly different angle, we start seeing wildly different numbers. So even directionality is like, if it's slid there, but that doesn't always happen. So when any of our clients have those things, and like we're not going to give them to them, but they already have it already, we'll kind of look at them and be like, oh, cool. Like,
let's do a real
but
test.
I'm just not like, I'm never going to be changing programs based upon the data from those things. Yeah.
Got it.
And nothing against those companies at all or those technologies, but if it's helping you, do it.
Right.
If it's not though, then don't. It's probably the lazy answer for it.
Exactly. Well, and I think also like, doing some of these surrogate tests is a good way to kind of, if you can't really go to a VO2 max laboratory, getting a surrogate test on yourself is also another good way.
Here's like a better halfway house here. If you can wear one of those devices that you already have while you're getting an actual metabolic test done, and they come back and they're pretty similar, then maybe you can go home and use all your training and all that on your wearable. And then you're once a year, once every 2 or 3 years, you go back in the lab and it still keeps syncing up. Then, hey, perfect world.
There you go. Right. Absolutely. So just a little bit more on the strength training piece. Is it ever too late to start strength training?
It's never too late to start any form of exercise, any habit change, any health change. But very specifically, I can answer this empirically because we have done studies I've been involved in where we are doing training studies on 70-plus-year-olds, on 80-plus-year-olds. There's a lot of literature. These studies have been done many, many, many times. And the things you're going to find, and what I'm representing here is not one particular study. I'm representing multiple studies across multiple laboratories, different teams of scientists, men, women, Finland, Denmark, the UK, Germany, Japan, Brazil, America. For this question, they're all giving you the same answer. We see no particular line of age that says you can no longer grow muscle mass. We don't see that. We don't see any line of age that says you can no longer develop strength. We don't see, and for the record, none of these studies report any increased risk of injury. Adverse events tend to be extremely low, if not non-existent, in most of these types of studies. Way lower than you would think. In fact, almost always lower than when we do those studies in our dropout rates in college kids is way higher than 70, 80-year-olds. Like we always joke like in the lab as a graduate student, because if you're doing a training study with 70-year-olds, like you better be ready 20 minutes before the appointment because they're never not like late. Zero chance they're late. Miss a session, no chance. You do that study with college kids, you better have a 4-hour window, right? And you're going to get half paying attention. People are retired, like this is their coolest thing of the day. No offense, but they're showing up. They don't miss sessions. They don't complain. One of my favorite stories ever, I wasn't there for this one, but it was sort of got passed down over the years in the lab of one of the training studies they did in 70-year-old women. And they were kind of like, I think they were actually doing a biopsy. And they were just asking like, how you doing? Like whatever. And, took the biopsy from her leg and she kind of got annoyed. Was just like, honey, I've had 7 kids. And we're like, all right. Like,
there you go.
He's like,
this
biopsy's
nothing.
Like, maybe this little thigh bruise is like, maybe you're all right.
Yeah,
So they tend to be super, super, super resilient. So
right.
Yeah, you got to be a little bit more conservative.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we're not doing a 1-rep max test day 1 or a 3-rep max or a 5-rep max for that matter, right? We're not going to progressively overload as fast. We're not going to take as many risks. We're going to be a little more conservative. But we also don't need to treat them like they're frail either. They're going to be just fine, right? The volumes doesn't have to be the same. You can train them. One of my favorite studies ever was a giant plyometric study in older men and women.
Oh, yeah.
No adverse event, like no injuries, no problems, tolerated well, and massive improvements in muscle size, balance, stand, what are called like very standard activities of daily living tests, where they sit them in a chair and literally time them how long it takes them to stand up and walk across the hallway, right? These are really common tests in these areas. Yeah. All these things, right? You're 10, 20, 30, I don't remember the exact data, but 40% improvements in everything and no dropout, no injuries.
What ages?
That was 70 plus.
70 plus. Huh?
Yeah. So like even then, like jumping landing's not a big deal.
Incredible.
You just, again, be intelligent about how you progress it. So the way that I will teach this is, and by the way, the same research will hold up in children for the most part.
Yes.
This is not an age or a sex issue. This is a quality of movement issue. Right. This is a quality of programming issue. Yeah. If you give anybody, I don't care if they're 6, 26, or 66, if you give them too much volume, bad things can happen. Right. If you give them too much intensity, bad things can happen. If you progress them inappropriately, bad things can happen. If they move poorly, bad things can happen. If you do all that stuff combined, bad things will happen. Right?
Absolutely.
But that's not an age thing. That is and by the way, when I say too much intensity or too much volume, there's no numbers I can give you there because it is relative to that person, right? Here's the example. Do you run much? Would you consider yourself a runner?
Myself? Yes.
Yes. You. Okay. How many miles a week do you run-ish?
I would say I'll run anywhere between 3 to 5 miles 3 times a week.
Okay, so you're running 10 to 15 miles per week. Great. Let's just say 10. We'll make the number up, okay? Now, if I took you I'll do a little bit. Your range is 10 to 15. If I said, hey, next week, doc, let's get to 17 miles, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
All I did is I increased your upper range by 2 miles.
Right.
Okay. If I took somebody who doesn't run and I said, we're going to go run 2 miles right now, and they're your age, your body weight, but they have not run in 10 years, I promise you the next day they're going to wake up and their quads or hamstrings are going to be destroyed. It's not the 2 miles.
No.
It's the progression.
It's the progression.
From 0 to 2 is much different than 15, even though 15 is at the upper limit.
Great analogy. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
It's not the weight you lifted. It's not the percent of heart rate you're at. It is the change from baseline, right? It is the general number we give is 10%. You don't want to accelerate more than 10% per week from your standard. If your standard is 0, then we're going to make up 10%, right? But 10% might be, we're going to walk 800 meters 3 times per week, and we'll see what happens, right? For you, I would not hesitate to take you up 2 miles. Right? Well, that's 20% if you're at 10 miles. Okay, you're probably going to handle that just fine. But I wouldn't take you from 15 to 20.
Right.
That's too big of a jump. That's almost doubling at your low end. It's 50% increase at your high end. Way too much. You'd be fine for 1 week. But could you do that for 6 weeks? Something was going to happen. Knees going to start acting up. Back's going to start. Who knows what's going to start happening, right? No guarantee, but very, very likely. If it's not 1 weekend, it's going to be somewhere between 1 and 4. Yeah. Things will start creeping up, right? We need to progress that thing slowly and intentionally. And so I know people want numbers, but you genuinely cannot give them weight or days per week or whatever. It is always relative to that person's baseline because those numbers are irrelevant. That's the same for a 6, 26, or 66-year-old. Kids can handle anything if they are brought along appropriately. A 26-year-old who's in the gym 5 days a week can still get overuse injuries really quickly if they put on 50 extra pounds. And that might be the same relative percentage as you putting on 4 extra pounds. It's not the numbers that matter. And I know that because I've coached people. I coached just a little bit a girl named Steffi Cohen. She's a doctor of physical therapy. One of the meets I coached her for, she was 119 pounds, and I think she deadlifted 520. Right? For her to increase her training load by 50 pounds in a week is nothing. But she's, at the time, 120-pound girl. So it's not, the number is irrelevant. Right? It is completely irrelevant. It is always relative to your body weight, or not body weight, but your past history and background. That's the way to think about those things.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that 10% rule because people always wonder, how much should I be progressing? Some people, on the other side of that too, let's talk about a little bit about exercise progression because you had a great podcast on this, and one of the protocols you had talked about progressing based on your own ability. Some people never really progress. They just stay at the same rate of exercise or the same weight or the same number of reps for years sometimes. And it's not because they don't want, it's just because they haven't tried. And so there needs to be a certain level, like you were saying earlier, at the beginning of the podcast, also trying to make some progression in the gym as well. So
I would suggest people stick to the same skeleton structure 4 to 12 weeks. Okay. At that point, you need to make some sort of very noticeable change. This could be your exercise selection. This could be the repetition range, the amount of sets that you're in, if we're talking about lifting. Okay. Every sort of maximum 12 weeks, you probably should have a very noticeable change in your approach. What this allows you to do is make very, very small progressions for those 10 to sort of 12 weeks, right? And so a very easy classic strength and conditioning example. Let's just say you're going to go 8 to 10 weeks or whatever you're going to be. You might do something like a very, very slow increase in weight, 5% at most, combined with a slow decrease in volume. And so you might go something like, hey, for the first couple of weeks, I'll do 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps at 100 pounds. Every week, I'm going to go from 100. Next week, I'll go to 105. And then maybe I'll stick the next week at 105 again and then I'll go to 110. Right? Very slow progression in your weight. Now over the course of 4 weeks, I just gave you, right? And now the 5th week, maybe we take a 20% deload. So now we take it down to 90 pounds. Whatever, right? Still going to work. We're not off that week. We're not sipping Mai Tais in Cancun. but we're not like really pushing it either. It's enough to stimulate maintenance, but a lot of recovery. And then the week you come back, now you go to 110, right? Or 105. And so we can we do this stairwise, up, down, up, down. Every 4 to 6 weeks, we take a little bit of it back off and then back up. In that example I gave you, if we did 12 weeks, we could do 4 weeks on, 1 week deload, 4 weeks on, 1 week deload. That took us 10 weeks.
Yeah.
Right? We're in that grade. Now, since we were increasing our load, that's one example. You could also do that while decreasing your volume a little bit. So instead of doing sets of 8 to 12, as I increased my weight a little bit, I also started backing down to sets of 7 to 8. And then that next 4 to 5 week training block, I get down to sets of 5 to 6. So I've steadily brought down my load or my volume, which allowed me to put more weight on the bar. That's how I got to 110. That's how I got to 115 or wherever I'm going to go, right? So now I've progressed. I've matched volume by bringing that down, so that allowed my load to go up.
Right.
Now, I finished my 10-week cycle, and by the time I finished, I'm doing maybe sets of 4 or 5 or 6, and I'm getting pretty heavy. Finish that, and then now maybe I switch into another cycle. I go back to the beginning, or I go to sets of 15, or I do some other thing. Maybe I stay there, but then I switch my exercises up just a little bit or something like that. So kind of playing volume and intensity against each other.
Yes.
And I apologize. I keep exchanging intensity and load. For lifting weights, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the same on like cardiovascular intensity, perceived effort. That's not what I'm saying here, right? It is how much weight's on the bar. All right. So I'm sorry if I made that confusing. But you can, with weightlifting related things, and I know I'm also being very myopic, just only talking about weightlifting. There's lots of other ways to exercise. But that's just as a conceptual practice here. We can do the same thing for endurance related events, right? If you're going to increase your mileage, right? So maybe you will increase your speed of your swimming or your cycling speed if you tone down the mileage. Mm-hmm. Typically, endurance work tends to like to ratchet up mileage as their progression strategy. Fine, but you do that, you up your mileage, but don't do the I did 1 mile today, therefore next week I'll do 2 miles, and then I'll go 3 miles. That's a recipe for pain like we talked about, right? 10%.
10%.
Weekly. 10% weekly volume. Add up how much hours you were in the pool, how many laps you did, the yardage or whatever it is you did, on distance around the bike. Add that up for the week, and then say, okay, next week my plan, put it together, make sure that total weekly number is not more than about 10% or so higher. Because what ends up happening is you go, I'll just do 50 extra meters on Monday, and I'll do 200 extra meters on Tuesday. All of a sudden you're like, damn, that's a 35% increase. Yeah. That'll get you real fast. But the same principles would apply. 4, 5, 6 weeks, have a deload, start back to the beginning, change it up a little bit. Now move to more intervals. Now move to more something like that. So if you're kind of just constructing this thing on your own, that's just a really, really good template. 10 to 12 weeks with a couple of little mini cycles in between that. And then at the end of that 12 week, you don't want a drastic overhaul, but you could have a pretty good change in kind of what you're doing. And that will allow you to continue to work really hard for people who like to work hard without getting the consequences of overuse from the same stimulus all the time, as well as plateauing and peaking.
Yeah, that's such a great, simple model to continue to progress without hurting yourself in whatever you're doing, whether it's weight training or like you said, swimming. It just kind of keeps you moving forward. Yep. I love that. I love it. Yeah, because you find a lot of people, they're like, I'm just not progressing, like 6 months later. And then you find out why. It's just like there's no variation at all. It's just always the same thing every single time. I see that a lot.
One of the episodes that has yet to come out is on peaking, plateauing, and overtraining.
No, I can't wait for that one.
We'll talk in detail about these things. But this is one of the primary causes of it. It's been our experience. Everyone that has come in that's like, I'm plateauing, I can't get past this. We're yet to find someone who didn't have a reason for that.
Right. No,
it's not your genetics, by the way.
And your first couple of episodes too, or your second one and your third one, you had some great protocols. For those of you listening, you want some really specific protocols on those episodes for strength training and VO2 max training.
Yeah, we actually spent, and it was episode 2. I spent the entire one just going through 2 different endurance training programs. Mm-hmm. One of them was by a guy named Joel Jameson, and it is a general VO2 max and conditioning program. And then he made the first, I think 4 weeks of it free in the show notes. And then I also went through another program that was designed by my friend and colleague Dan Garner.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote this program for a guy named Mark Bell.
Yeah.
Mark Bell is a lifelong powerlifter, sweetheart of a human. And Mark went from lifting weights and powerlifting and bodybuilding his entire life to running his first ever marathon.
Yeah.
And this happened to be Boston, by the way. And so this is called Faster in 50. It was a marathon program in 50 days. He obviously took more than 50 days to prepare, but it's the final 50 days. Mm-hmm. And they made that entire program free. Wow. So I went through it in the podcast, and then you can get the whole thing. I think it's fasterinfifty.com or something like that. If you Google that, Mark Bell will come up. And you can see the full nutrition program, the supplement program, the drug program. Mark's very open about his drug use, the stretching, the lifting, the training program, all those things. And Dan and Mark I don't know why they did it, but they just gave the whole thing away.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So if you want an actual program to follow, depending on your flavor, you can pick Joel's program or Dan and Mark's.
Yeah. Those, and I looked them all up, and they're fantastic programs for someone just getting started.
Yeah.
Or you're doing something for a long time and you just plateaued. They're great programs that are going to take you to that next level as well.
Especially if you don't want to think about it. You just kind of want to follow a program.
Right. Absolutely.
And then in episode 4, we did a similar thing, but for the strength training.
For the strength training, right. Exactly.
Yeah. So we did a hypertrophy program, muscle growth program. And then we did more of like a sport performance power and strength program. Travis Mash, who himself is a multiple-time world record holding powerlifter,
right,
and coached a ton of national, international level weightlifters, NFL guys, things like that. So he put that program together. It was actually a real program. It was, I think, this year's preseason training program for, I think it was his NCAA football team. So he literally just gave me the actual program, and I went through it in the podcast, the same thing. And he was like, dude, here you go. And you can just go get the program. I don't remember if it's the whole program is free or part of it. I think the whole thing is.
Perfect.
But there's like a speed one, there's a strength one or whatever. Yeah. So, man, the goal was to just go straight into, there's not a lot of physiology there. There's no background. It is here if you want to hear what a program looks like. And then in both those, I walk people through, hey, how are they progressing? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? So you can kind of understand a little bit of what's going on, but you can also just go straight to the programs.
Yeah, no, that's very generous of all of them, and for you to put these out there, because these are...
That was Rob's idea, by the way, both of those.
That's great. Right? Thank you, Rob. But I think these professionally developed programs are great places to start. And obviously, everyone's different, like we keep talking about. You got to find what works for you. And maybe none of these will work for you, but you can create something on your own, just knowing some of these basics, how to improve, how much to increase your volume or your intensity, 10% being kind of the max number per week. I love those tips.
Yeah.
So
do you have, in your guys' practice, do you guys have a training program and stuff that you're able to put people on as well?
We're actually developing one right now.
Okay.
And we're really trying to customize it. I'm all about N of one, right? I mean, we got to really find something that works for each individual person. And I want to talk more about that with you right now. That was my next question for you, actually, because we put together different programs for people based on the amount of time, where they are in their training age. So it's really just kind of matching the program to the person mainly. And, one of the questions I have on that for you is, I would say 15, 16% of people, somewhere in there, less than 20 probably, come in with no training, maybe forever in their life or not the last 10 years, right? And so I think where we struggle sometimes is, what's the best way to ease those people back into a training program, or what would that training program kind of look like?
Yeah. Okay, so you can look at this a couple different ways. We just gave the example of, hey, download one of these programs that weren't built for you and go after it. If you want to do your own thing, what I would like to answer this question with is kind of like we've been doing today. What's the spectrum across your interest level and your income or resources, okay? Right. So that everyone has an option. All right. At kind of one end of the spectrum, if you're the person who wants to learn to write your own training programs, we actually have a whole course for that. It's in our Biomolecular Athlete.
Okay.
It's called we actually made it's a toolkit. So it's a course and all of the tools, the Excel files, all those things for people to develop their own training and nutrition programs for longevity, for fat loss, for strength gains, for performance. Depending on your goal, it is the actual, again, Excel file, the the numbers to calculate, enter in your stuff, and then you can build your own training programs through that.
So we'll link to the show notes. And that's on your website? Or
That's Biomolecular Athlete.
Biomolecular
Athlete. It's my education company.
Amazing. So we'll link to that in the show notes.
So we did seminars on that, and we're like, dude, just put this out. Right. I don't remember exactly how much that cost, but there's a little bit more the medium kind of, it's an educational course. You guys know how much those cost. Cheaper than that, if you wanted to go with something like a virtual coach, Renaissance Periodization is fantastic. Nick Shah and Mike Israel are amazing. I don't know what their programs cost, but it's an app. It is a artificial intelligence-backed app. It learns you and your progression. I think it's specific to pretty much hypertrophy. Mm-hmm. Sorry, guys, if it's not. But the RP Hypertrophy app, if that is a goal, would be a great way if you're coaching yourself. You don't want to write the program yourself. You don't want to learn. You just like kind of want to follow something. Then I would recommend that. If that's none of the case and you're like, I don't have $1 to spend, where do I get started? Okay, well, let's answer that one. You're going to have to do some work, but let's get this figured out. We would generally say, okay, let's figure out what you're willing and able to be consistent with. Step number one. Okay, if that's 2 days a week, don't put 3. If that is 2 days a week, let's put 3 because it's going to mess up the program, right? Let's be realistic. If we could do it, ideal world 3 would be the case, okay? I would love 4. I'll settle with 3. I will work with 2. Okay, but if you let me pick, I'm going to pick 3. I am generally going to want to have people to do mostly whole body workouts. Okay, this means whole body exercises as well as covering multiple body parts within the workout. Okay, so very rarely do we do body part split training. Occasionally, this would be that bell curve at the end of it. Overwhelming majority of our people are going to get full body training, right?
That's good information.
This is equally equivalent for hypertrophy, and the research behind that is pretty stout at this point, and it's way more time efficient. The other thing it guards against, and this is just a practical Andy coming out because I'm a human too, right? Yeah. If you do body part split training, and by that what I mean is, arms on Monday, biceps on Tuesday, that kind of thing. If something happens on that Tuesday, that whole body part got missed. Right. Your kid got sick. Business meetings ran late. Our podcast went 4.5 hours instead of an hour and a half. Like, now you're not going to get to work. You skipped it. If it's whole body, then you're not out anything, right? So nothing goes really long without getting trained. And that is a huge issue. One of the main drivers of hypertrophy is making sure you can have continuous muscle tension at enough volume. You have to be able to just not go, you don't need that much to maintain where you're at. But if you're really trying to make progress, you don't want touch points that are missed. You just can't have big lapses. And one of the big causes of lapses is going to be things like I missed a session because of life, right? Now, if you're a 24-year-old kid and you don't have kids and you don't run, like, you never miss your workouts. I get it. But for the rest of us, I don't know, 25% of my workouts get missed.
Yeah.
More maybe.
It's just life.
It's like there's no chance, right? Flights get delayed.
Exactly.
Traffic happened. Like it's all the stuff that you can't control, right? Kids, all that stuff. All right, awesome. So I want more full body exercises as well as workouts themselves. Mm-hmm. What we're generally going to do is each day pick what is the most important thing we've got to get done. And that's going to be our whole body exercise stuff. And then that's going to be very general. By general, I mean we're going to look to do something that is a lower body press and a lower body pull. We're going to do something that is an upper body press and an upper body pull. Great. Now, I can explain what those are in a second. After that, though, at the end of the workout is where I can allow isolation work.
Right.
Okay, you have a particular injury we're trying to work through. You have a particular body part you just like to train more, or you want your calves to get bigger, or you love doing shoulder work. Great. Yeah. But that's at the end of the workout. So when the time got shorter or whatever, and something got skipped, it's that isolation work, and we got our big work done. So we're doing 3 days a week. We're going to do multiple full body exercises, and we're doing something in those 4 categories. Pushes tends to be literally things where you're pushing away from your body. So for upper body, this is a horizontal push. Could be a bench press, could be a push-up, something like that. Could be a vertical one, pushing over your head, handstand push-ups, whatever you want to do. Same thing with pulls, horizontal row, pull up, lat pull down, so on and so forth. Okay. Lower body pressing away from you could be a leg extension, could be a squat, could be a split squat, could be a lunge, variations of that. Pullings are the opposite. It's a hinge, it's a deadlift, it's a Romanian deadlift, it's a hamstring curl, something like that. So we're looking for multiple joints to be moving at the same time. It is really what we're after. And if we can do that, we're going to get most of our stuff. If we're making sure that we're in good positions, that's going to get a lot of our core and our torso handled along the way. If we have to do some isolation work on top of that for our core or torso, we will. Almost surely, though, we're going to incorporate that into our warm-ups as well as our cool-down to get that volume, to make sure we get touch points there. And that tends to get us in a pretty good spot. So categorically, that's how we're going to structure it.
Yeah, I love that. It's just, so simple for people, as a starting point for people to at least get into the gym and just do, you mentioned 4 main exercises and maybe a 5th added on top of that.
Yep.
Some core work. And that's on the muscular strength portion of things. And what about on the cardiovascular training part of things?
So we want to think about VO2 max as having 2 minimum, I prefer 3 components. Okay. Component 1 is going to be abilities to sustain work over a long duration. Call this steady state cardio, whatever. Call it aerobic exercise. Call it zone 1, 2, 3. I don't care. Does not matter to me at all what zone you're in. This is 20 plus minutes. This is no intervals. This is no breaks whatsoever. This is something where you're sustaining work. Okay. If you want to hike, if you want to ruck, if you want to swim or stand up paddleboard or kayak or skateboard, I do not care at this level, right? We'll care later. Right now, give me something where you're not going to stop. And almost always, we're going to want this to be nasal only breathing. Right? So we're intentionally doing that because we need to work on that physiological aspect. Almost everybody does anyways. Brian McKenzie and Emily Hightower. I don't know if you know Brian.
I don't.
You guys have so many mutual friends. I'm surprised you haven't. His company, Shift Adapt, so much research, so much information rather in this area. He can lay out all the reasons why you want to do these things, but so something in that area. Okay. Again, this can be, if you had to get this done, this could be done walking. This could be whatever needs to be done. We're going to check that box off.
So 20 minutes on the minimum.
Minimum. No maximum.
No maximum. Right. Exactly. Got it.
And minimum twice a week. Once a week I will live with, but like really 2 times would be good here if we can. Other end of the spectrum is we have to do something that touches maximum heart rate. Ish. Right? I don't literally mean maximum, but like we got to get close-ish to there. If you want that to be a circuit with dumbbells and great. If you want that to be a group activity class, a jiu-jitsu class, you want it to be cardio kickboxing, you want to do, sprint the straightaways, walk the corners, fine. If you want to do 30 on, 30 off, you want to do 4 minutes on, 4 minutes, like those don't actually matter at this level. You got to do, when I'm looking at somebody's program, I'm going, do you have something that's going to hit that, right? Maybe that's your sport or your practice or whatever it is you're doing. Okay, great. And if we're hitting there over there, then I'm like, okay, that box is checked off. But we have to get up to some sort of maximal, and in this case, literally it's anaerobically, so we're going past VO2 max. We're going to 110, 20, 30% of VO2 max. Ideally, I would love to get part 3, which is the middle ground. This is 8 to 15 minutes of sustained work, not at max heart rate, because that's not going to be possible, but it's 80+% heart rate, right? This is not, you're not having a conversation. You're not enjoying your life at all, but it's not so low you could be answering texts. Like we're not doing any of those things there. That is the most equivalent one basically to VO2 max. So for those 2 aspects, the maximum heart rate and this kind of third category, once a week is enough.
Okay.
Right. And if you look at actually Joel Jamison's work in this area, he's going to tell you that maximum heart rate stuff more than once a week is, some people can get away with it, but many can't. Where you live, do well is you got to accumulate your volume. And that middle area, by the way, that 8 to 12 minute one, it doesn't have to be that hard, but it's not walking either, right? So you just got to put in work, right? You got to really put in work there, accumulate some miles, accumulate some yards or whatever the case is, and you got to put some work on the system. So if you were to build this whole week out, if you want me to do that, it would be something like this. I'm literally making this up on the spot, but it could be something like this.
Perfect.
Maybe Monday, we do a lift. Okay, great. We're going to do a 10-minute walk in the morning, nasal only. We're going to lift in the early afternoon or right after work. And then we're going to do a 10-minute walk in the evening before bed, after dinner. That 10-minute walk, by the way, especially the night one, there's going to be no earphones in. We're not listening to podcasts. We have to take arousal out of the system. It is down regulation. It is nasal only. If it's dogs, if it's family time, if it's whatever, but it is not any more up regulation for the vast majority of people. Okay, and we got that lift in. We came in and we did maybe something like 2 to 3 sets of 4 exercises, right? We did kind of one each. And maybe this is the leg press. Maybe this is push-ups, some bent row with the dumbbell, and then maybe some hamstring curls. Okay, great. And then we finished that with, you love to do more glute work. So you did some hip thrusts and you built your butt muscles up nice, like fantastic. And you did a set of 30. Yeah. You did a set of 100. I don't care. You went as hard as you could till you got a giant pump and then you rolled on the floor for a minute because it was in screaming pain. Yeah. Fine. I'm good there, right? Maybe you did some sort of extra ab work. Cool, whatever. Yeah. That's a 30-minute workout. Mm-hmm. Good solid warm-up. We're there for 40 minutes total. Okay, we're out of there. Tuesday now, we put in a little bit of work on Monday. So Tuesday is probably going to be one of our longer duration days. So maybe we're now going stand-up paddleboarding for an hour, right? We're going to go do something like that. We don't need to do our walks per se, although we'll keep them, but we're going to do that longer duration thing. We're going to be plenty recovered by Wednesday. So now Wednesday we come in and we do, maybe we do our VO2 max day. And we're going to get a thorough warm-up in. We're going to feel really good. And we're going to run a mile as fast as we can. And that's going to take most people 8 to 12 minutes. And that's all we're going to do. This is also a 30-minute workout. It's going to be 10-minute warm-up, 10-minute run, 10 minutes laying on the ground. And like we slowly make our way out of there. Hopefully some down regulation stuff. I still want a night walk. Yeah. Like I really want, because remember, you ran a mile. That's not very much work. Right. It's really, really hard. It's cardiovascular intensity, but you actually didn't do that much work. Right. The running a mile and walking a mile is the same amount of calories. Yeah. Still a mile, right? That's work. That's what calories are. So there's not extra work there. It hurt more. You got it done faster, but it's not that much different. Yeah. So we still need to move some calories and we need to move. So I still want my morning and afternoon walk on that one. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now we're into Thursday. We're lifting again. Right. Okay. Similar. If you want to do the exact same workout for Monday, do it. If you want to switch the movement patterns up a little bit, great. If you want to switch the rep ranges. So Monday we did 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps. Mm-hmm. Maybe Thursday now, we lower the rep range to 5 to 7 reps per set. And maybe we either do one more set. So now we do 3 sets instead of 2 sets, or we lift the load. We go a little heavier. So we got our kind of hypertrophy day on Monday. Thursday, we got our strength kind of emphasis, right? Same thing. You can finish with glutes. You can finish with a different one. Now you're going to do forearms and posterior shoulders for your posture, neck, calves, toes, whatever you want to do, right? So we're going to do our down regulation work. Okay. Now we've checked off 2 lifts, 1 long duration, 1 high intensity, and we're only at Thursday. Yeah. Maybe Friday, we do 3 10-minute walks. No. We're going to go, we're chilling, right? We're going to go out, we're going to have fun, and we're going to take that sort of day, and we're enjoying it. We got our basic movement in. Now, all of a sudden, we come back Saturday, and we can add in intervals. We can add in a lift. We can combine them. Let's do our lift, and now let's finish our lift with 30-second burst on an assault bike as hard as we possibly can. Take a 90-second break, and we do 4 rounds of that. We got our lift. We got our thing in it. No one ever said I couldn't do them the same day. Right. Still talking a 45-minute workout. Right. And now we're out of there. Sunday, we're off entirely, or we're doing more of our low intensity stuff if we wanted to get 2 days a weekend, or we're doing hot yoga or sauna and ice, or you're playing video games all day. Yeah. I don't care, right? Like you've gotten a pretty good balance of all those things in there.
That's a great workout program. I'm going to type that out for all the listeners and put in the show notes because it's like a perfect place to start for people. And it, like you said, it checks off all the boxes and it's pretty easy. It's like it's 45 minutes a day for 5-6 days a week and you're done. And also it's varied enough. So if you end up skipping a day accidentally, you still got the full body work in. And you still got most of it in.
What I would recommend doing if you're in a situation like that is not necessarily holding those workouts to the day. So don't do that lift on every Monday. Just do those in order.
Oh.
And if you're feeling tired, take a day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But that way, if you're like, oh, something came up on Monday, now you do Monday's lift on Tuesday and you just shift everything back one day. That's honestly how I train, because I'll go sometimes 14, 16 days and not take a day off of working out.
Right.
But then also life gets in the way a lot. And all of a sudden it's like, man, I got 3 workouts in this week because blah, 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 blah. And so if you do that, you're going to end up, it's really, really hard. So I have personally just said, okay, I have 30 workouts to do. And my goal is to get these 30 workouts done in the next 60 days, whatever the case is, right? So I actually program it that way. Typically, I'm looking for more like 40 and 60. Can I get 40 workouts done in 2 months?
Mm-hmm.
And when I get that done, sometimes it takes 55 days, sometimes it takes 70 days. Then we stop, reassess, and my coach writes me a new program, and we go on to the next one. That's how I do it. I do not do the kind of structured week to week because my schedule, it's just too challenging.
Yeah. And also that way is like a week is a human defined amount of time. And so it doesn't really exist.
No.
So at least you're staying on the schedule and not skipping certain days. So that's
what you want to do in that case though is you need to give it an end time number,
right,
and a number of tries, because if not, you lose control.
You lose control of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's great advice.
So 60 days, 90 days, whatever it's going to be, and then say we're going to do X amount of workouts done, and then fill it in as much as you can and get it close.
Yeah. And that works pretty much even for the people that have a good gym routine as well. This
Totally.
would work. And then so that takes care of that group 1. Group 2 and 3, we talked about a lot already about how you kind of step up your workout without injuring yourself. I think also, and this is for me, like I'm in that group 3 where I have a really good gym routine, 5 days a week. I'm in the gym. Every once in a while, just like most people, I end up missing a day, but I'll make it up the next week or the next day. And struggling sometimes with making progression. And I like your advice on that. The way you said you go up and take it a step down, go up and take it a step down. I do see a lot of people that are hyper-focused on, just that steady state cardio. Some people that don't do any cardio and they're lifting weights.
Yep.
And I counsel my patients and my clients to mix it up, especially as we get older. We do need to have that variety, right? And then I also like to add, and I'd love to know your feeling on this, is some sort of like functional stability work as well at some point to those people that have got their routine down. And so I'm curious as to how you put some work into that for your clients.
So we actually do not address it specifically because when you are moving anyway, we should be addressing movement quality.
Got it.
So we don't have when we're coaching people in person, every step you take, every repetition you do is an assessment. We're watching everything. And when we consider things to be failure, it is when you have a technical breakdown. We're not looking for, did you run the time, right? Did you complete the lap in time? It is, when did you break position, right? This isn't, stop bringing them up, but this is a Brian McKenzie, Kelly Starrett thing, right? From many, many years ago, right? Watch yourself in the aerodyne. You're not done when the clock hits, you're done when the position is broke. Okay, so that is how we're defining technical. This is also, I've heard Lauren Landau, strength coach for the Denver Broncos for many, many years, now at Notre Dame. He would always test this stuff, right? When you lose position, the clock stops. That's the drill failure. So we are always coaching position, stability, balance, however you want to define it. In terms of actual balance, this is why you don't want to have all of your physical practice in a gym.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? If you look at actually, even to go a little more esoteric, research on late onset dementia and Alzheimer's, one of the key factors is lack of proprioception, which is say you do not want to lose your senses being your smell, your taste, your hearing, your sight, and proprioception. That's your body's internal understanding of where it is in space. Okay, so you don't want to lose that. One of the primary ways to not lose that is to make sure that you are constantly in different environments. This is where, and those just listening, I'm pointing outside right now to the beautiful landscape, but this is why having some of your practice outdoors is incredibly important, because if you and I were to go on a treadmill and do a 60-minute, that 90-minute routine or whatever that person was doing, great. Awesome. I'll use a treadmill, no problem. I have a salt bike in the house. I have no issue with a ski erg, rower, good with all of it, right? If we can do that same work though out there, and now our vision is, instead of being 18 inches in front of us, is 18 to 8 miles out, right? We're hearing different things, we're smelling different things, and as we're walking, our feet are going through proprioception. Balance, it's gravel, it's avoiding the dog, it's moving up and down on the thing. That will handle much of our loss of proprioception. Last component here is we're never going, I mentioned earlier we want to do sort of 4 components: press, pull, upper, lower. What I skipped, what we would always do, is you also want to work on things like single support, double support, which is to say, you're never going to do all your workouts on 2 legs of support unless you're a power lifter, weightlifter, but even then. So we're going to have something where we are challenging and limiting balance, limiting stability. Like, you can phrase these things different ways, but we're not only going to do, say, for example, a rear foot or a Romanian deadlift, like a hinge, bending over to pick something up, okay, like picking up your kid kind of movement. Sometimes we'll do that on one leg. Right. So now actually, because you're doing that on one leg, balance is so challenging, you don't actually strengthen the hamstrings and the glutes that much because the load has to go so low. Sure. However, the demand for stability gets really, really high. So it's not better to do things on one leg. It's not better to do them on a stability ball or better on, in unstable surfaces. It's different. Both of those have pros and cons. And so we would actually blend both of those aspects into all of our training, and that's how we handle it. So as we're putting somebody on a rear foot elevated split squat, one of the things that we're paying attention to is, again, are we losing to one side always? Are we leaning more forward on one side than the other one? It's not that leaning forward is bad, but are we shaking on one knee versus the other one? All of that stuff is going to tell us those internal diagnostics of proprioception and balance and stability. So that's being incorporated into everything, every exercise, every rep, every set. While you're swimming, one example of this I can tell you, we had a distance runner girl one time, and I was watching her run from the back, and I could always see her right trap was higher than her left trap, right? So now we ran movement testing, restriction stuff, and she didn't actually have any mobility or restriction issues. It was simply a learned pattern. Probably an old injury, could have been a hip injury or toe injury. And so all I did is I took a tennis ball and I put it in her right pocket, which is to say, I want you to feel your elbow go past your tennis ball every time. And she just had to learn that she was hunching her right shoulder to her ear. She put that down. She's like, oh, okay. I didn't need a corrective exercise. She didn't need ART. I didn't need needling in there to release it. She was just pulling her shoulder out. Yeah. So it's in a part of every movement we're doing, is that this is what coaching is, in our opinion. Yeah,
it's muscle memory, and you just forget it's even happening until someone points it out to you.
Yeah, when we break down muscle quality, we look at range of motion, we look at stability, but one of the other things we look at is awareness. Right. Do you even realize what you're doing? I've taught this for so many years. Yeah. I've had like hundreds of kids. Oh, I can't squat to full depth. I can't. I'm like, really? Like, okay, do you realize that your foot's going this way? What? And like, they thought they had some sort of mobility restriction or whatever. I'm like, no. You just didn't even know your arm is in the wrong spot. Sure. It's just an awareness issue. So it's not always the case, but a lot of times it's just not even knowing where things are supposed to be.
Yeah. And one of the things I talked with some of my clients about is just, do a few workouts without any headphones in. Just focus on the movements, focus on where you're standing, what you're doing. I think people are so used to just like putting their AirPods in, being at the gym for that hour, that they forget that every once in a while they need to do it without it to make sure they're moving right? Yeah, and having that awareness.
Like, God forbid a podcast.
Yeah. God forbid.
Like, that's just a bad, for a lot of people, it's a bad setup, right? There's so much going on. Your ability to change what you're doing, even something as simple as, there's enough research on mind-body connection. Right. Which is to say, if you think about a body part when you're lifting, you can have enhanced results.
Absolutely.
Whether it's strength or hypertrophy. So if you're thinking about, your next podcast that you did on phenomenal blood work and biometrics you're looking at and you're trying to really think about interesting stuff, and you're just like kind of cruising through your workout, like what are we doing here? You would actually be more time efficient taking the headphones out, getting the great workout in, and then paying attention at your desk, listening to the podcast and taking real notes. Like, that's a far better way. When you're doing them both at the same time, you get benefits in neither.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember there was one time that I wasn't making any progress in the gym, and I just decided, I heard a podcast about this actually, not while I was working out, but at another time, of just visualizing the motion before you do it.
Oh,
and
yeah,
then while you're doing, feeling the entire motion.
Yeah.
And just that broke through that barrier. Just the visualization and the focus on the movement and the muscle and what's happening in it broke through that barrier.
Yep.
And made strength improvements.
Yeah,
so
that's a real thing.
It's really powerful.
It's a
that
very
mind-body
real thing.
connection is super powerful.
Yep.
Now, so let's move on a little bit to that fourth category, people.
Yep.
Your weekend athletes that are running marathons, triathlons, et cetera. And a lot of these, I find that as we age, as we get into our 40s and 50s, there does seem to be some degradation of biomarkers, specifically around inflammation that I see. I see some metabolic disease developing in some of these people. And I just want to get your take on exercise volume as we age, specifically related to those people that are in that higher volume category, and how you can kind of notice if this is causing some impairment and where we should go.
So this is actually a really, really, really interesting question. Man, I have actually some ideas we could talk about afterwards, but when I was a doctoral student,
right?
So again, I'm a PhD, not an MD. So we're doing our stuff in our lab and all that. However, we took one course, our physiology course, in medical school. So I'm the only non-MD in that. The person teaching was a PhD, so there's two of us and the rest are MDs. And that class frustrated me beyond all imagination.
Welcome to my entire medical school career.
Well, what killed me was I couldn't get anything correct, because when you look at the exact same metrics from a medical perspective versus a performance perspective, it's ultra confusing. So, I mean, I could albumin, hematocrit, hemoglobin, total blood volume.
Sure.
If you put these things on a chart and you gave us no context, and I looked at numbers, I would go, all right, let's see, hematocrit 51%, hemoglobin in a male 16.3 grams. Okay, that's pretty good. Albumin 5 point. Okay, all right, like we're in a good spot here. And total blood volume 6.5 liters. I'd go, that is a really fit.
Yeah, I want to be that guy. Yeah.
And a medical doctor would look at that and go, get that person on a diuretic right now. You're
Absolutely.
Like, if that person is overweight and unhealthy, that person's about to die. If that person's healthy, that is peak physiology. So it was so confusing for me. I'm like, oh my God, like I can't get these questions right on these medical exams because it's the same thing, right? So when we're starting to look into that, we really have to look at markers and have if you're going to work with somebody on this, you have to understand your person interpreting your blood work. I'll say it this way. The value in any sort of molecular biomarker is not in the marker.
Right.
It is all in the interpretation. And someone who's looking at numbers and going, that number is high based on the reference range, therefore we want it lower, run to the hills. Run to the hills, right? Because for many reasons, this is a very poor way to handle blood chemistry. These markers are some of the ones. And I'm bringing this up because you're saying level 4. We deal with this on a daily basis.
Really?
Yeah, of course, right? Because if you pull any of these people you talked about, somebody who's 40 to 70 years old, and they're a category 4 person, I promise you, you take their blood work, put it in front of an MD, not an MD like you, right? Other ones, they're going to scream, like they're going to see markers. They're going to look at AST, they're going to look at ALT, they're going to see creatinine levels, and they're going to see hematocrit levels, they're going to see albumin levels, they're going to see other inflammatory markers, and they're going to be like, whoa, what's going on? And we're going to look at this and go, no. What you don't understand is AST and ALT are not just liver and muscle damage markers, right? There are known associations. You scale those things up, right? You can see what's going to happen with AST and ALT with muscle mass. So if you are not accounting for total amount of muscle mass, you can't interpret those numbers properly. You don't know what you're doing, right? Like there's a big difference there. If we don't know what's happening with creatine supplementation and or contraction, if you look at markers like CRP and you're able to balance that out with creatinine, now you can actually understand what's going on. But if you're not paying attention to both these things, you're going to get wildly, your data is going to be crazy. If you can't look at albumin, measure that against sodium-potassium ratios, understand that against other hydration markers like blood glucose and blood urea nitrogen, you have no idea what you're looking at. You know this one. For the audience, I'll give you like a direct example. I know you're all over this one though. Albumin is probably the most valuable blood marker in the entire world, like point blank period. It is an acute phase reactant, right? So maybe you've talked about these in the past a bunch, but that means it's going to be reduced in the presence of inflammation. Okay. It is also directly, because of the way it's calculated in the lab, it is directly influenced by hydration status. So if somebody comes into you in the sense that it goes up under dehydration, right? It only goes up under dehydration, basically. Many things will pull albumin down, but nothing takes it up besides dehydration, right? So if you see reduced albumin, you have to run 3 or 4 other things to know what's going on. If you see elevated albumin, like you pretty much know what's going on. You take that, look at osmolality concentrations, you look at other things, you're going to know what's actually happening there. Okay. So if you were slightly inflamed, albumin is down, and slightly dehydrated, albumin is up. What's going to happen to your albumin?
It's going to look normal.
It's going to be dead in the middle.
Exactly.
And you're going to be like, well, like I don't feel great. I have these little headaches going on, brain fog thing, my recovery is going down, blah, blah, blah. You fill in the blanks of these category 4 people, right? And if someone doesn't know what they're doing with, can't look at AST, ALT, can't look at GGT, can't look at other additional markers here, you're going to go, I guess you're fine here. It's, your testosterone is low, or like some other asinine comment, right? Like this is not what's going on here. Like we're seeing clear signs of here. So you have to be able to differentiate that. You have to be able to look at and pull apart acute versus chronic dehydration. Like we have to be able to do that. This is where all those markers we just walked through will tell you that, because if we see this situation going on, we have to be able to look back and go, oh, you know what? Actually, I don't think we're in a problem here because that person was maybe just a little bit dehydrated that day. These are false flags right here. You have to understand what are actual direct markers in blood chemistry versus what are calculations, right? Because if this is a calculation, free testosterone, that's not a real thing, right? Like that's not actually being measured. Depending on the lab you're pulling it from, they're literally using different calculations. So this stuff has to be accounted for in these category 4 people, because a lot of the stuff that's going on is not actually a problem. It actually is fine. These are normal physiological responses. And the last thing I'll say about this, sorry, this topic gets me fired up.
Right,
As
I
you
love
see
it.
me
I
going,
love it.
like you can't simply be judging positive or negative in these folks unless you understand what a true reference range, what a bell curve looks like in that population. Right? We've done thousands of these in these people. And so I know, one last point I'll back up on, then I'll pause and let you react. I'm sure you have a billion things to say on this topic too. You're foaming at the mouth, I can see. We've been talking about bell curve, but the way that reference ranges on blood work is a bell curve. It's a 95%. So what they're going to say is if you're looking at a blood report, and I'm sure you counsel everyone that you go through on this stuff, what they're going to say is if you're, above or below the reference range, what that means is 95% of people were in here, 2.5% on the bottom, 2.5% on the right? And even if you're in that 2.5% top or bottom, most people are going to look at that and go, well, you're just a little bit high, a little bit low, not a big deal. Like for most blood chemistry markers, right? It's like, oh, you're just a little bit diabetic. I'm like, no, I don't want to be a little bit diabetic. Like I don't want to be a little bit inflamed. I'm trying to do what a level 4 person is trying to do. A little bit inflamed is not okay here, right? We need to get this thing dialed in. In addition, that reference range is built on NHANES. It's built on Mayo. Like these are not people. These are not your equivalents.
No.
So you don't want to look at the report yourself and go, oh, the report said this number is H or L for low. Throw all that out. You have to understand the database you're looking at. So a lot of those markers that will come back, we'll look at and go, no. That is actually dead on for high performance for a 55-year-old. This is dead on for a 38-year-old female. Like this is where we want you to be for high performance in those ranges. So you have to be able to calculate that. Last thing I'll say is, since you brought up inflammation, you have to understand what we're trying to do from a training perspective. If we are a category 4 person, we're trying to push the pace on performance adaptations, right? Which means I am trying to cause physiological stress. That's the only way I cause adaptation. If you blunt, reduce, diminish inflammation, I am blocking the signal for mitochondrial biogenesis. I am blocking the signal for muscle growth. I am blocking the signal for connective tissue development. I don't want those there. If I'm running around at an inflamed state based on a whole cascade of markers for a year, that's a problem. But if I'm in the preseason phase, if I'm in a developmental phase, if I'm in an overload phase, I want those numbers. In fact, if I'm not seeing those numbers move up, I know we have more to push on this person. If we're peaking though, then we want the opposite.
Sure.
We want that stuff dialed in. And so the context of going category 1 person, easy, right? Keep them out of metabolic disease.
Right.
Hey, like I'm telling you, you're really running your risk of a heart disease, category 1. Category 2, little more, hey, okay, I know technically diabetes starts at X, but you're pre-diabetic. We don't even want you to be pre-diabetic, right? This is whatever. Okay. Category 3, a little bit different, more like you. Now we can start picking apart some things that you're not going to find on medical testing interpretation, right? And going, hey, this is actually a marker of whatever we're seeing. Category 4, same thing. Now you need performance evaluation. Right. You have to have blood evaluation from the perspective of high performance. What are the reference ranges? What are the markers? And then how do we actually understand how these things are a part of your training program based on your phase? Are your calories going up, going down? What are we doing in these areas? That's the proper context. And so you simply can't take the same markers, evaluation steps, and analysis in all 4 of these categories in blood. You're going to run yourself into a circle of mind death because you're going to be thinking you're going to be thinking these people have kidney failure constantly because you're like, no, because I mean look at creatine kinase. Creatine kinase in a normal person. After in fact, there's data. I think it was from. I don't know if it's officially. I'm not going to say. It was a competition in which people do multiple workouts in a day with kettlebells and things like that. Right? It's not against them. But this was a case study I'm thinking about. That person's creatine kinase was like 200,000.
Yeah.
Okay, rhabdo is considered to be, I don't know what. I actually don't know what rhabdo is. Maybe 20,000?
I think it's a lot lower than 200,000.
Well, it is a lot lower for sure. After a football game, like we play a football game on Sunday, on Monday, oftentimes creatine kinase 10,000.
Right.
If you go from normal like baseline of 100 and you go to 1,000, you're probably really wrecked and sore.
Right.
Right. So really hard workout, you'll be up to 1,000. So if you're looking at like a single creatine kinase marker and you're like, oh my gosh, you're at 1,200, I'm looking at that and going, that's nothing. Like that is absolutely nothing.
Right.
Now, if you're looking at CRP and ESR and a whole bunch of other markers and you're seeing that, then it's like, okay, we have acute and chronic inflammation. Right. But we can differentiate that, right? We know how to cross-reference these markers. So I just onslaughted you there. I'll pause for a break, but there's a lot here. This is we spend an enormous amount of time in this area for category 4. That's really what we do.
Right. I mean, and this is so this is such a great conversation around this category 4 because it is different, and it just highlights the fact that every person that we see is an individual. Yeah. And not only do you have to individualize the training programs, but you individualize your interpretation of the biomarkers for where they are.
You have to.
And if you have someone that's just looking at biomarkers and not looking at you as a person or talking to you as a person, which there's a lot of, as you know, this is happening all the time.
It's fine for one. For category 1, it's fine. It is, I'm not even health conscious.
Right.
I'm looking for a high-level overview of my overall metabolic cardiovascular health. Like, great. Absolutely great. If you're in category 3, 4, though, this stuff does, and this is why people end up going, I got my stuff checked. I'll put it this way. I ask a question all the time. How many of you have ever gotten blood work done? Like, almost every hand goes up, right? If you're in category 3 or 4, watch this one. How many of you felt like you got tremendous benefit from it and then all the hands go down, right? If you're in category 1 or 2, you probably got some big stuff. But if you don't have a medically diagnosed disease, then you end up going, well, they said everything was like kind of fine. And you're like, oh, there's a lot more in there that we can see that is kind of fine. We can see markers, tons from basic blood chemistry. I'm talking like CBC, CMP stuff, right? Sure. You can see a ton about gut health signals going on. We can see a ton of inflammatory markers and immune markers that are right there in front of people. Like albumin is on. Like, find a person out there listening. I'll give you a challenge. Find a person who's been told that their albumin's off.
Right.
You'll never see it. Yeah. Like you almost never see it. And we will look at it and go, okay, that is within a medical range. That is not in a performance range. Sure. And we're just going to see that thing constantly light up.
Yeah, absolutely. And then this is what also drives me crazy about people that get, those home testing kits and just getting their own biomarkers done. And, those are usually some of those people that are like actually cognizant about their health. So they're checking.
I know.
And they have no one to interpret it for them and come in freaking out, or they have no idea what those results really
Yeah,
mean.
don't like citizen scientists, I'm all about. Like I'm super all about it. But one more time, I'll reiterate. I think the general point we're both making here is when it comes to blood markers specifically, or related urine, saliva, these types of molecular markers, the value is not the number.
Right.
It is the interpretation, the context. That is what separates. Look, if you're looking for telehealth and you want to just get something like that done so that you can get growth hormone, great. Or you want to get testosterone, like fine. I'm not against that at all. Do you? But if you're really wanting to get someone to go break down, why am I having these issues with focus? Why is my energy the way it is? Or whatever thing. Why am I having these plateaus? Why am I getting hurt all the time? Why are my joints always in pain? This is not going to be a marker. You can look, if you look at your printout and someone's a medical doctor, I don't mean to at all saying about medical doctors, or whoever, you're doing it, or an online service you purchase it from, and all they're telling you is numbers that are high versus numbers that are low. You got nothing.
Right.
You got absolutely nothing out of that, because the end step here is, what do I do about it? The answer is not take the numbers that are low and make them high, and take the numbers that are higher and make them low. That is a terrible, terrible idea.
That's a bad idea.
It works for a couple of markers like vitamin D.
Right.
Okay, fine. If that's low, most likely you want to take vitamin D or get more sunshine and take it up. But almost every other marker past that, including things like testosterone, the answer is not just take the thing and make the number go up. That is you're going to run yourself into a very quick problem, if not big problems for a long time. That's not how physiology works. It is a mosaic. You have to understand a little bit of the picture there and to understand how to play that accordion so that we get the right sound out of it. Those services are just,
right.
Don't do them.
Yeah.
This is what I said earlier.
Absolutely.
If you're going to use these things, just don't. You're better off, because you can get false information, false flags, things you think are high that they're not. Iron is the easiest one.
Sure.
Massive. You can get a blood test done on back-to-back days. One day will tell you iron can deviate 20, 30%
Absolutely.
in a day. So you're going to have one test done that says you're super low, and you're going to take a bunch of iron. The next day, after you're done the day before, it told you super, super high. That can change because of night sleep, right? Your spleen will automatically alter what's happening.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. You have to have somebody that can just go, look, no, hey, great. Tell me about your sleep the night before. Oh yeah, it was terrible. I hate needles. So great. We're not taking action on this.
No.
Why? Well, because here's the physiology of how that can, awesome. Is it ferritin? Do we have TIBC? Do we have, we have to be able to fully evaluate the whole picture, in addition to your context and your sleep and your hydration and mental health, and were you just traveling, and what's your water quality? Like, all these things go into really, truly interpreting it. And that's why people can get real results from blood work, a ton of real results from it, if you really know what you're doing, especially if it's not our category 1, category 2 people. If it's certainly 3 or 4, this is where we make our money, for sure.
Yeah, this is where you really need someone who understands biomarkers, understands what the range is for you, and interprets it correctly. And so, like you said, so many of these, you don't just treat on one biomarker test.
Never.
You have to repeat. You have to be able to see this longitudinally. What are the other confounding factors, et cetera.
This is actually the argument I'll make for people who feel good or great. I feel good. No, you should still get it. Why? Because you do feel good now. But when you show up at your door, or you show up in one of my companies 10 years from now, when you don't feel good, if you have these 10 years of past data, it's a world of difference of what we can do.
Game changer, right?
The easiest example I'll give you here is the easiest one to pick on is testosterone.
Sure.
Okay. If you're concerned that your testosterone is low because of any number of reasons, you have symptomology, or maybe you don't have symptomology, but you've heard all these people talking about how testosterone is low and whatever. Okay, awesome, fine. I don't know if it's low.
No.
You don't know if it's low, because some people are fine at 250. Some people feel terrible at 1,000. Too many factors go into it, let alone it's not the only thing controlling how you feel. It's not accounting for 1,000 other things that go into your whole phenotype and your experience in the world. Okay, great. However, If you could look at their medical records and go, okay, well, you had a blood test done once a year and you're 44 and now your libido's not great and your recovery's kind of going down, you're sleeping great. And your testosterone is 350, total testosterone, of course, right? Okay, great. Might be low, might be normal for you. I don't know. And let me look back. Well, actually, it's been 350 for the last 10 years. When did your symptoms start? Oh, 2 years ago.
Right.
Well, then we know it's not that.
Exactly. It's something else.
Or the opposite. Well, Jay, actually 10 years of historical records, you've been at 650. And the last year you've gone in half. Oh. Now you got to go on a whole journey of figuring out why and not just give them testosterone. But nonetheless, if I don't have that, you as their doctor is going to sit there and go, I mean, certainly could be 350. That's not huge, but that's kind of borderline.
But you don't know it's related to the symptoms. You have no clue, right?
You have no clue.
My dream is that, somehow there's a law passed that everyone gets their hormone levels measured when they're 25 years old. So we at least have that data point that we can compare to. Like these were the levels when you were 25 and we have, but no one has that, And so
imagine you have some sort of brain injury as well.
Right.
Okay, great. Right. Are you really back? We don't know. Well, we actually don't know if your endocrine system's back online. We don't know what it was before. Brain injury is one example, but you get the idea. Pregnancies.
Sure.
For the female stuff, okay, I don't know what you were before you're pregnant.
Right.
Now we have nothing to go off of. So having that baseline data is massively, it's an investment.
It's an investment.
Even if it's not mattering now, and you and I are obviously, we have conflicts of interest here. We both have companies that sell these products.
Sure.
But it's, it really,
it's really important. It's super important that you at least get your baseline done at one point in your life, as early as you can. In your 20s is if you can do it, but if you're past your 20s, just get it done as early as you can so you have some level of baseline that professionals can refer to in the future. I think we're both saying the same thing. Wow, so much great information. I feel like you and I could probably talk for 4 days in a row.
I feel like we're on topic one.
Exactly, right? I want to touch base with you on a few other things that a few people asked me to ask you, and I think they're important questions. One is, for someone in their 40s, 50s, and you're training hard, you're strength training hard, and is there really like an upper limit to where you can strength train, knowing that you're just knowing that you're increasing volume and increasing intensity mindfully, like you said, maybe 10% a week or something? Is there a point where you should maybe just take it easy so that you don't hurt yourself? If you have good awareness of your body and the signals that your muscle is, how your muscles are feeling.
And there's no inherent reason.
Right. That's what I would think too. There's
no physiological rationale that suggests that. If you're starting to see more aches and pains and the injuries are becoming more frequently, then that's what I'd say. But if you're tolerating it well, there's no reason to
stop.
Think you're going to have some sort of problem.
Exactly. Okay. And on the corollary to that question, I think a lot of people had as well is, how do you know if you're overtraining? And I think you just kind of answered that, but I want to expand on that a little bit more.
Okay. So that's why I did a whole episode on this. This is a really fun question. How do you know if you're taking the day off because you're just being a wuss?
Yes.
Or you're actually listening to your body, right? We tell people the same advice comes out of both sides of our mouth.
Sure.
Be smart, especially as you get older. At the same time, you're not always going to feel great. Push through it. It's like, how do I know?
How do you know, right?
Okay. It took me a full podcast to unravel. I'll try to give you some of the cliff notes right now, but I can't do the whole thing justice. In this case, this is where historical data will be really helpful, whether it's blood work, whether it's training logs, whether it's, are you doing some sleep tracking? Do we have heart rate recovery? Do we heart rate variability? Do we have respiratory rate? Do you have appetite? Is something else changing? Okay. Is there an explainer? You've been sick. You've had a lot of extra work stress. You're just bought a house. Okay. Then we might have, all right, if there's nothing else going on, it's like, no, nothing's changed. Okay. Interesting. Have we checked off nutrition? Have you made substantial changes or not? Are we really sure we're fueling properly? Have we done anything? We're going to run through all these variables. And any data we have, we're going to be able to know, right? If we have actual tracking data like we would have on people, I will know these answers before they happen. Sure. We will see them coming. I have some of the athletes where we've taken urine, saliva, and blood daily for years.
Amazing.
So we will know very clearly what's happening. You can get some of this stuff from like our sleep tracking data will actually give us a ton of physiological information, way past a consumer sleep tracker. So we will have some data. If you don't have any of that, then you're thinking through other stuff. To really have to think through, is anything else really substantially changed? Okay. Then our next criteria is if you think no, what happens when you went and warmed up? When you went and warmed up in the gym, how'd you feel? Once I got going, I felt fine. Okay, you were probably fine then. Yep. Once I got warmed up, I got halfway through the workout and I was just, boom, performance is down. Okay. A little bit of a different answer. Most of the time, once people get warmed up and get going, you feel it better. This was probably an acute fatigue, right? We actually do have a whole course coming out on fatigue management too. You go all this, there's a ton of stuff to look at, but this would be a rough criteria.
Sure.
You're sure, like, funny enough, this sounds stupid. No one will do this. No one will listen. I guarantee it, but I've seen it more times than I can count. Did you think about your hydration today? Hydration is something we never pay attention to, and it has massive acute changes, right? Small as 1.8% dehydration can affect mood, concentration, focus, accuracy, muscular endurance, physical strength. 1.8%. You get past 2%, you start seeing actual pretty legitimate decrements. So a lot of times we're just like, yo, let's go chug a bunch of water right now. Give it 30 minutes, see what happens. And sometimes like, I still feel terrible. Okay. Sometimes like, actually, damn, I feel better. Just got a little dehydrated.
There you go.
You'd be really surprised how often that can happen. So we're kind of run that one. If it's the case and it was one day, fine. If you skipped a day, I don't really care. How long is this going on? Okay, if this is a day or a couple of days, this is acute fatigue. Not a big deal. If this is persisting for weeks, we've got different scenario on. So that's a rough idea of some of the things we're thinking through.
Sure.
Did we ensure we didn't do something silly and stupid? Went out, either that is a visible stressor, is what we call them. So visible stressors are things that you can see and feel. I didn't sleep well last night. Hydration, food, things like that. Stress in my life. Okay, all this stuff gets treated equally. Hidden stressors are things that you won't feel. This is a micronutrient deficiency. This is a potential pathogen. This is a toxin. This is some other thing like that going on. All right, we're running a quick gamut on that. If it goes away with the warm-up, fine. If it doesn't, maybe we take the day off or we throttle it all the way down. If it's persisting for weeks, now we're stepping in. Now we're having real intervention. But at minimum 3 days before I'd care.
Okay.
If you feel junky 2-3 days in a row, I'm fine. You're probably fine. We will see this a lot. People will say, man, like I feel I overtrained. I'm like, oh, how'd you get out of it? Oh, I took 3 days off and I felt great. Okay, that's overreached.
Yeah.
That's not overtrained.
Right.
Overtrained takes weeks to months to recover from.
Got it. Yeah.
That's our distinction definition. So if you're like, yo, I took Saturday off and I just Netflixed and chilled, awesome. We were just acutely overloaded a little bit, some other factors. So those are just some of the things we would think about in terms of like, how do I know whether I'm in or out?
Yeah.
If you have any data at all on yourself that's objective, then we can look at those metrics. One of the ones I'll look at the fastest and most is respiratory rate. If your respiratory rate is up, something for sure is happening. You're getting sick. There's a stressor that's weighing on you that may be a hidden stressor that you don't realize. We tend to not see that. If it is normal, then we might just be a little bit tired. But respiratory rates are HRV, of course, are key ones, but those ones really to pay attention to.
Yeah, those are two great biomarkers. And most wearables will give you those biomarkers now too for recovery. And I always tell people, absolutely go by how you feel, but along the lines you're saying, you need a little bit more data as well. Yeah. And the length of time that this has been a problem is very helpful.
And the other thing to think about, Sue, on this is, are you a normal caffeine and or stimulant user?
That's true too.
And they don't have an effect.
Right.
You're like, man, I took my caffeine, I still feel awful. Okay, even when you're habituated to caffeine, it still should have an ergogenic effect. And if it's not, then it's like, oh, okay, maybe we wanted something. But other times you take it and you're like, all right, okay, all right, I can go do this. And then you get going a little bit and you're like, all right, I felt okay. You kind of got through the hump. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
That's super helpful, absolutely. And then another question on the docket here too is your view on supplementation. Are there any ones that you feel are absolutely necessary or absolutely critical for us to think about?
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about that? Just high level points on
Sure.
supplementation.
Yep. Again, no one has to ever have supplements.
Absolutely.
Whole food is the win.
Yep. All the time.
Repeat that sentence 50 times, 100 times. Okay. That's the truth. That's how I coach, and that's how I believe it.
Sure.
No question. Additionally, I actually work with and am partnered with Momentous.
Sure.
So conflict of interest to disclose there for you all there. That said, your answer. There's a handful that we would kind of call like the big three or the big four. And these are ones that have a very high safety profile, which means you can't really overdose on them. They're not going to pick up liver issues or kidney or brain or problems like that. Biggest side effects you're generally talking about are like maybe some GI distress. Some people don't like that. So big safety profiles. In addition, they have a large evidence base, which means many studies, placebo-controlled trials, men, women, young, old, clinical populations, young populations, so on and so forth. And number three, they generally work, which means they show a positive benefit in a range of things, from performance markers to molecular markers to whole body outcomes. All right. That's pretty strong, right?
Yeah.
When you're like, it's safe, it's been done on a lot of different people, and has multiple mechanisms of effect, and the data are well-rounded from multiple scientists and multiple labs. That's a really strong evidence base.
Yeah.
What are those? Creatine monohydrate, fish oil, protein, whey protein, potentially, and a little bit less strength here, but a multivitamin if needed. Magnesium, lower on that chain, but that would be pretty close to on that list, especially if you exercise and sweat a lot. But those big three would probably be the jump. Vitamin D would also probably be on that.
Yeah.
I call it like tier 2 maybe.
Yeah, especially if you have levels that's more compelling.
100%.
Right.
But those are the ones, if you had no testing at all, and you either felt like you didn't have access to food, or your food was dialed, but you wanted to do more stuff, and you didn't know any marker about yourself, I would feel very comfortable with people taking fish oil, magnesium, and making sure their protein intake is sufficient, whether they want to do that whole food or a protein powder for convenience. Then those would probably be the top three places.
Yeah, that's exactly my list. And I love that as a starting point for people. And everything else after that is just, you have to really look at the data.
It's precision now.
It's precision now, exactly. Yep. And a lot of people take a lot of supplements they absolutely don't even need, and they might actually be causing themselves harm. And
I wouldn't do it.
Exactly.
I honestly tell people, like, take those big three, I'm fine with. Maybe the big four in terms of vitamin D. Especially if you're taking vitamin D at a reasonable dosage, it's very unlikely you're causing problems.
Right.
If you're already like moderate to high and you go a little bit higher, fine. Yeah. Past that, I wouldn't take anything without specific rationale. Absolutely. You can run into problems. We talked a little bit about inflammation, but if you take things that lower inflammation, that's not a good thing per se. If you don't have inflammatory problems, taking anti-inflammatories blocks adaptations.
Sure.
This is not a good thing, right?
Right.
Micronutrients and minerals, don't play with. If you want to play with macronutrients, carbohydrate supplements, fine, right? But when you start playing with vitamins are okay, but minerals in particular, irons, rocks, things like that, those have real physiological consequences at small dosages in ways that matter a lot. So really be careful with minerals.
I can't tell you the number of people I see on a multivitamin with iron. I'm like, why are you taking iron? And they have no idea. That's what I was bought from CVS.
Yeah. Like, don't. That's why I even said like multivitamin. Like, okay, that's the layer down a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially men. You want to be very careful about the multivitamin with iron for sure. But women as well. Like, precision matters with minerals.
Absolutely. The precision is key there. And then on the protein front.
Inflammatory regulators.
Yes.
And cortisol regulators as well.
Right.
Because I see those things massively overconsumed with no rationale. Sure. You don't want to take inflammatory supplements with no cost. You don't want to take minerals, and you definitely don't want to take cortisol modulators.
Absolutely.
Adaptogens that lower cortisol very specifically. If you have low energy and you smash cortisol at the bottom, you're going to feel horrible.
Right.
So you don't want, don't do that stuff at all.
Yeah, that is great advice. Yeah, without very specific rationale, those will actually, and on the worst case, cause you massive health problems, but also
most definitely
just it'll blunt your gains in the gym too.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. So really good point there. On the protein front, do you have a favorite protein powder that you use, or just any type of good, well-sourced whey protein? Or
Yeah, the highest level, if you know that it is clean,
yes,
fine. Whey protein is awesome. There's a lot of good companies that make it. Obviously, I love Momentous, but you can get it from plenty of other places. Just make sure that it has a handful of things. Number one, for the athletes we work with, of course, everything has to be either NSF or informed choice certified. If you're not an athlete, you don't have to have that standard. But what you do need to make sure is that they're getting it from a place that has been tested to not have contaminants. Now, I've actually published research in this area. The amount of adulterations, mislabeling, and contaminants in dietary supplements is astronomical.
Wow.
It's a lot better than it used to be, especially in America. It's pretty safe, right? Any of the bigger brands are generally going to be safe. If you leave America, some countries get really, really screwy. You also don't know if you can trust the data, and things get sort of off of there, okay? So that said, you need to make sure that it is tested for contaminants, heavy metals, leads, cadmiums, mercury. All these things can be really, really alarmingly high. In addition, whey proteins have historically, and anyone who's been in the whey protein game knows that, like in the 2000s and the 90s, this was constant. They did what they called amino acid or protein spiking,
right?
Which is to say they're putting a whole bunch of amino acids in that are way cheaper, that have little effect on muscle protein synthesis, right? And so this is where you get what you're paying for. Like you found the cheaper version at the big retail store, and it was half the price of the higher quality, but it's not, because you're not getting any of the active ingredients or getting a much smaller dose is the more appropriate thing to say. So when it comes to protein, pick whoever you want. I've worked with tons of different companies in this area, and a lot of them, but just make sure the labeling is on there. Make sure that, show me the data. Are they transparent with how they sourced it? Like Momentous does grass-free, GMO-free, antibiotic-free stuff. Okay, if you don't care about that, fine. But are they at least telling you where they got it from? Can you track back to the manufacturer and show the verification of testing for contaminants, toxins, spikings, things like that? Right. That's all I'll care about. That is actually especially true for fish oil.
Absolutely.
Like really making sure they can show you that there's no mercury in there is a really good thing. But the one I'd say about protein would be spiking, quality in there. And so I'd rather you not take it if you're not going to get a higher quality brand.
That's absolutely true.
And just don't take it with anything else. You want whey protein. Don't take it with whey protein plus stimulants or pre-workouts or you want that pure whey protein by itself. Absolutely.
You mentioned this last question because I know you've been so generous with your time.
I'm
really
good, brother. Keep going.
You're awesome. I want to talk to you a little bit about the environmental testing that you do, because I found that really interesting. I didn't know you were doing that for all your for your clients, and that's super interesting to me. So talk to me a little bit about what you do there and the rationale.
Yeah. So 3 years ago or so, I was at this kind of off-label human performance summit. And I got talking to a guy, and he was actually he had a company that built eye tracking, ocular testing for SpaceX, International Space Station, one of the naval groups, can't remember exactly. And one of the big things that you can do with eye tracking is you can get in very high resolution sleep testing. And so he started going, and he was kind of talking about how he wanted to do some sleep testing stuff. And I started talking about athletes, and he was kind of like, what do you guys do for your, $400 million athletes for sleep? And I was like, send them to a sleep clinic. And he's like, what? I'm like, there's nothing. We have no other options, right? We have a consumer grade wearable, or we can send them to a medical sleep clinic. And he's like, there's nothing else. Well, probably 2 months later, we built Absolute Rest, our sleep company, because he's like, dude, this is enormous. And he showed me his technology he had for the International Space Station. And part of that, they were, again, focused on ocular tracking stuff. And one of the things he said is like, hey, man, you want to solve the problem. How do you do it? I said, well, we have to know how somebody's sleeping, number one, and then why they're sleeping that way. The overwhelming majority of trackers will maybe at best tell you how you're sleeping, but they don't tell you information about why you're sleeping that way. All the stuff we've been talking about is both that, right? What's it look like, and then why is it there? And now we can solve the problem. Okay. So it's very easy to quickly figure out that the sleep testing that's being done is not actually in depth at all. So step number one is we built that. And so we built by far the world's most advanced sleep testing thing. Again, we can build a full clinical grade sleep study anywhere. Take it with you. You can do it every single night.
And this is using eye tracking?
This is a bunch of different things. So I'm getting to this part of the story. So we're like, great, what if we took a clinical sleep lab and we had the technology, we're already using it for these groups, and build that into a consumer available model, right? So we built absolute rest, which means we can do that in the comfort of your own room. And again, you don't have to worry about wires everywhere like you would see kind of hooked up all over the place. And we don't have to worry about going like, well, I got it done, but it was in this creepy sleep lab and I did one night or 2 nights. Do it 50 nights in a row. I don't care, right? Like it's very easy for you to put on and do. That's going to tell us now the most high fidelity analysis of how you're sleeping.
Wow. The
question then becomes, when we see a clinical sleep disorder, by the way, they're incredibly prevalent. 80% or so of sleep disorders are going to go undiagnosed. Affects everybody, athletes, non-athletes, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I can't solve it unless I know why you're sleeping that way. And so it's not good enough to just have the best sleep testing. We have to, part of this package, understand why you're sleeping that way. So one of the things that we do is positional analysis. So in your sleep evaluation, we see by position, when you're on your back, on your right side, your left side. What most people don't realize is the overwhelming majority of sleep issues someone has comes in a very specific position. Once we identify that, now we know exactly where to solve. That's if you have a sleep disorder or position. We have a scanner for your face actually on a very easy technology. We can look at anatomical, structural difference. Like, is there a pathway issue? Is it? And that happens, it happens, right? So is the problem your position? Is the problem some anatomical thing? And then we said, okay, what are the other factors that go into it? Well, one of the things that they have to work hard at the International Space Station on is regulating the temperature. Easy. Regulating pressure. Easy. Humidity. Easy. Also CO2 concentrations. Also mold, toxins, pollen, danders, allergens, all this stuff. And so we said, we have to be running a full environmental analysis of these people to understand, is it something in their environment that's causing the dysfunction? So we have a very small device like the size of a phone that can be placed in a room. And you can take it anywhere. I take it on airplanes with me all the time. And like, actually, when I was buying a house, I took it with me. I'm testing the air at 100% all times with me on my phone. It's funny because the realtor came in, she's like, what the hell? And I was like, oh yeah, pollen in here, Dan. They're like, what?
Wow.
Like, are you able to go, CO2 concentrations are too high in your house. Like, we took it outside. We could measure the area. Like, we can do all this stuff, right? You can't buy that. Like, that's right. That's what we have, right? So we're going to put that in, and we're going to look at a second-by-second breakdown of your sleep. And by that, I mean we're taking over 150 measures per second. We're not doing one measure every 5 minutes like a tracker would do, right? And so we will know within the literally millisecond if something happened in your oxygenation concentration, in your position, in your breathing, in your chest expansion. All these things we're directly measuring, leg movement. And then if we see anything synced up with the environment at the same timestamp, we can go, once your room crossed this threshold of CO2, we started seeing a 20% increase in movement patterns. You started rolling around a bunch. Maybe it was a temperature. Maybe it was a light issue. Maybe it was a sound issue. Maybe your white noise machine got a little bit too high, or whatever the case is, right? Again, was it something environment? Was it the sound, the temperature? Was it something in there, actually accumulation of dander from your dog? And then all of a sudden your nose got clogged up, and right around that time you started mouth breathing, and then this is what happened, right? Then if it's not environmental, we're looking at behavioral, right? So this is are you doing something? This is light exposure. This is exercise activity. This is like all the standard hygiene stuff is going to get measured. We developed the first and only blood test specifically for sleep-related physiology. So we're looking at a whole bunch of micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, melatonin, serotonins, things like that to see, like, is this a physiological problem? And then one of our co-founders was a Harvard-trained MD in sleep psychology. And so we're running through a psychological evaluation for anxiety, depression, all related to sleep, not just like general stuff there. And so by doing all that, we've got now an understanding of how you're sleeping. And again, we can do that at a high fidelity for 50 nights in a row if you want to get a real good baseline. We do that in your vacation house. We do that in your other house, right? And now underneath that, we go, okay, well, why are you sleeping that way? Was it physiological? Was it environmental? Was it behavioral? Was it psychological? Or was it pathological? Do you have a clinical sleep disorder or even a subclinical thing. And so now all those data then come back to our sleep scientists, who are some of the most published MD, PhD sleep scientists in the world, go through that stuff, create coaching programs, and then you're coached through that sleep program to get improvements in sleep. So we're not just going to hand you a report and be like, your sleep sucks, good luck, here's a CPAP. Not against CPAPs, but like that's not the best we can do. We're going to work through these problems. We're going to track and monitor. We're going to try things and give you reports back of what's going on. This is working, this is not. And there. So that is the environmental scanner is a part of that Absolute Rest elite sleep program that we do.
That is the most comprehensive sleep program I've ever heard of, ever.
That's why, that's why the wait list is enormous.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so I can't even imagine, like, it sounds like you send in a blood test, you send a device to their home. And
yep.
Yeah.
So all this stuff gets sent to their house.
Yep.
Again, handle the blood work. We do sort of all those things, send somebody to your house, whatever needs to get done, go to LabCorp, Quest, whatever you want to get done there. But it's all done from your own house, and it's on all the data comes back, and then you've got a central app and a hub to work through, and you meet directly with our our professional scientists. It's not like a telehealth sort of 10-minute thing. It's they're gonna rigorously debate the data there and come up with stuff. And then our team is solid. Jeffrey and Amy, like, they've been in the game for a very, very long time. They've published, They're still publishing. They're treating people, and they've built technologies, built these companies. So our team there is very, very solid. In fact, depending on the day, about 2 weeks ago, we just released what's called Sleep Lens.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our consumer grade version of that. So this is the, I can't afford the big elite program. It's not a cheap program.
Mm-hmm.
But the Sleep Lens program is, in the 3-digit price point, plus or minus. It's not all the bells and whistles. It's not all the blood. You're not meeting with, Dr. Bender and all that stuff. But you're going to get a full FDA approved clinical sleep study done many nights as you want, and you're going to get coached for several months on your sleep.
Wow. I can't wait to check
this out. There's nothing like it in the world.
Yeah, this sounds just revolutionary as far as, so many people struggle with their sleep. I would say it's about 90% of people I know that are not getting perfect sleep. And
what's actually crazy? I don't know if you've ever looked at the data. It's kind of like all the stuff we've been talking about, but there is, there's long-term medical consequences of bad sleep.
Sure.
And, people have talked about that ad nauseum. That's true. People do not realize the performance-enhancing aspects of going from even good or okay to great sleep.
Right.
I think the episode just came out. Yeah, I think it was last week's episode.
Last week was sleep.
Yep. The sleep extension research is so compelling for decision-making, executive function, word recall, memory, VO2 max, body composition, so on and so forth. So making sure that even if you're like, I don't have a disorder, fine. We say the same thing for, you don't have a clinical pathology in your muscle.
Sure.
But it's not functioning great.
No.
Your blood, we wouldn't treat, it would not be acceptable in any other aspect of our physiology, and we shouldn't do that with sleep. So it is a hammer that you can swing that is ubiquitous across your physiology, that, all it requires is a little more precision. And the metric you care about, your sexual function, your brain capacity, what
have you,
it goes up.
It does.
And it just improves. So it's been so fun in that. Just the amount of people who are just like, I've been to 5 sleep clinics. I've been on this before. I've tried, and you're like, oh gosh. And then just to see those stories come in and be like, well, it's this. They're like, jeez. Like,
wow.
It's been very marked, because sleep hurts.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not getting as strong as you want in the gym,
sure.
Yeah, whatever. If you're not losing those last 10 pounds, like, okay.
Yeah.
But when you don't sleep,
you feel
hurts.
It
hurts
right?
bad. So
I can't wait to do
fun.
this. I'm going to do it. Even though I think my sleep is pretty good, it's not awesome. But
what's funny about that? We actually have. I have to say this carefully. I'll tell you 2 stories. One, we legitimately saved somebody's life. That said that exactly. He signed his wife up. He was probably 60 or so years old. Had exited a company. Was plenty of funds or whatever. He's like, whatever, I want my wife to do it just in case. I sleep fine. He's like, I'll pay. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. So I went, fine. Then eventually he's like, I'll do it. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but our team saw stuff and was like, yo, you need to go to the hospital right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
I don't remember. I mean, I wish I knew exactly what it was.
Wow.
Oh, they're going to kick me for not knowing this. But they effectively sent it, like, it was almost overnight, and they ran him into, I think he was in Vail, got him into a place down there, and they're like, the medical doctors were like, yeah, you're a walk, you're like any second heart. I don't know if he was infarction or what the exact problem was.
Myocardial, yep.
And they're like, bam. And then he had to go through, it was years of stuff, but it legitimately was like, holy.
Incredible.
And he felt like he was sleeping very, very well.
Sure.
And was not. That's not common. If you feel like you sleep well, you probably sleep fine. I don't like overly scare
Sure.
people into it, but that has happened multiple times. And that also happened with one of our high performing athletes. Not the death thing, but the was using a tracker and was like, oh, I'm getting 90+% scores every time. But then was like, man, recoveries and stuff are slowing down. It's not that, it's something else. And then we ran them through our system, we're like, oh no. It's a little bit technical, but one of the things that can happen with like a tracker is they're going to tell you things like sleep staging,
Sure.
how much time you spent in deep or whatever. And those numbers are almost entirely garbage. The amount of time you spend in those stages is arbitrary. They can't correctly measure them, but it's not the time that matters. It's the amplitude within them.
Right.
And so we were able to actually see that. And we're like, no, you're actually, you're very, very shallow in this. And so we were able to make a bunch of improvements in that individual. And that person's a world champion. So it was like in the spectrum here, 60-year-old executive person was life-saving. This person was like, yo, you're world champion and you're not sleeping as good. And that story of athletes has happened multiple times with very, very high profile people's like athletes who every one of you, not even sports fans, would be like, oh, I know that name. Or like thought they were sleeping well and we're not. So
it's just, I mean, the power of sleep to improve or affect every aspect of your biology is just, it cannot be overstated as we know. But it just goes to show you too, like just the value of doing intense studies into some of this stuff is just, it can be a game changer for people.
And it's just so awesome that we're in a time now where these things are real.
Right.
They're available. I mean, services are remote and some of them are way past your budget point, but give it a year, give it 5 years. Like it's coming, right?
That's what I tell people all
Our
the time.
company, your company, other people, I don't care. It's clearly getting to a spot where it's going to be democratized or really, really, really close. So if you can't afford it, fine, keep paying attention. It's going to get there.
Yeah. I feel like you and I are the same on this. We want everyone to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And as things get less expensive, we can make it less expensive ourselves too.
100%.
We want it to be less expensive. Like we don't want people paying $4,000 to $5,000 for an MRI.
No.
It'd be great if you can get it for $100, $200. I think one day it will be $100 for an MRI.
It most definitely will be.
Absolutely. They'll be all over the place.
I mean, the cost of MRIs alone have gone down almost a magnitude of, like an order of magnitude in the last few years. They're going down like 7 figures per year, depending on like to get into them.
It's like genetic testing, right? It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now it's $100.
Oh, it was hundreds of millions.
Yeah. The first one.
Yeah, for sure. And in the billions actually. And then now it's like for sure.
Yeah.
A couple of hundreds of
things. It's an exciting time to be alive.
Yeah,
it really
man.
is.
That is real. And then the fun part really that we'll leave a little teaser on is the stuff that we can actually do with prediction models now.
I want to hear more about that.
So we actually finished a project called the Human Digital Twin. And we did this in collaboration with a bunch of different companies. My friend Cody Burkhart, who runs Human Works out of NASA, led the charge of this. And so he brought together a bunch of companies and said, can we take a bunch of companies and run full analysis of them? So we did absolute rest, we did vitality, our blood work stuff. We put them through force plate testing, motion capture, movement analysis. We put them through a whole bunch of, tons of companies came together on this. And then we took all those data and we made a digital twin of them. And then we're able to run simulations on them, millions at a time, combinations of training, recovery, supplements to say like, what responses are we going to get out of your physiology?
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah. And we did this and we presented, we put 4 people through it as our kind of like our proof of concept pilot thing. And then we're able to come back and then run them through an intervention and then actually test them post, right, as a proof of concept. Right. So we did that thing and then sort of showed the world that a couple of months ago and said, it wasn't perfect, like by any stretch of the imagination, but we did it.
And correlated pretty well?
Yeah. Like
that's incredible.
It's not even that hard at all. There's a company called Sphexa. It's kind of under the radar. It stands for like a Silicon Valley exercise something or other, whatever. But their ability to run digital twins is insane right now. And so they can do a ton of cool stuff with that. You can't go buy it as a consumer, but we use it a lot in a lot of different areas. And so those things where you can come in and say, hey, look, what do you have for a wearable or whatever? Okay, sure. You got this, you got this, you got this. It can all link up to their system, and their system can use it. They were actually, Sphexa was able to predict, I think it was, don't quote me exactly here, but I'm pretty sure it was Swedish national championships in swimming within 1.5%.
That's mind-blowing.
They did, I think, within like, sorry, Sphexa guys, they told me before. Don't quote me, but you're getting the concept here. I think it was within 40 seconds of the Chicago Marathon performance.
That's incredible.
And all they used for that is what they actually did. I'm jumping the story just a little bit, but I'm getting the right point here. I don't want to sound untruthful, so I'm aware of that, but it's the same concept here. They handed their coach note cards 6 weeks before the race and said, this is the time all your people are going to run. And then when they actually looked at the numbers, they were within 40 seconds of the marathon performance of all of them.
Just using the digital twins.
In that case, all they used were training logs.
Oh.
They used training logs, built that into their digital twin, ran it, and said, this is the times they're going to run. They can actually take that and then tell you, like, if you have a goal in mind, they can say, hey, look, it's going to take you this many months to hit that number. So you want to squat 300 pounds or you want to run or whatever. They can say, okay, here's your data. Let's track your physiology, whatever. It's going to take you this many months to get there and tell you the day that you're going to break that number on.
So there's a world where you can like run hundreds of simulations and create
millions.
Perfect training program for somebody.
Yeah.
Like to the rep count maybe.
Yeah. So actually what Sphexa does is they have a coach, a running coach, I forget his name, but I think he won Chicago Marathon a bunch of times. And they said, give us all your training programs and we will build a digital you. So you can hire him as your coach for pennies on the dollar and he'll, he went back and verified that. So your ability to get coaching from people like that or people like me or whoever else, if that person is willing to be able to run that, make digital coaches of us.
Yeah.
And now you're, instead of having to pay, 6 figures to like me or you directly coach you.
Sure. You got it all in the palm of your hand and your phone even. And it's doing it in real time, interacting with your physiological data.
Exactly right. So it's adaptive training.
Adaptive.
Based on how your body's responding. Now, there's a lot of people sell things like that while I'm here, and they're terrible. Right. They're not good at all. But some people do it very, very, very well.
And is this using artificial intelligence, machine learning?
It's all those things. Yeah. It's historical data. It's machine learning. Is artificial intelligence. Like when people throw out things like AI and machine learning, like it can be a whole mess of nothing.
Yeah.
Because those data are only as good as the data in it.
Right.
So like if you were to use, for example, and I've seen people do this. They're like, oh, we're going to jump all these blood work companies because we're using AI and machine learning. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But if they're all based on poor reference ranges.
Back to reference ranges. Exactly.
Like you don't know what good is.
Exactly.
So like, until you get that secret from my block box, like you still don't have any good data to work off of. Sure. So good luck. So a lot of those programs are that. Like if they're based on poor information, if the coach doesn't really know how to coach, if they don't have lots of really good data on you, then you're going to get, like you're just going to get the noise, the loudest noise in the room, which is not a good thing. So most of that stuff sucks right now, to be totally honest with you. But there are other groups like Sphexa who are real exercise physiologists, from real scientists, real coaches built into programs. So whether it's them or another group or anyone else, the point is these things are going to be online really soon. That'll allow people to do a lot better with exercise.
Yeah. And I feel like in the next 5 years, things will be completely different at the rate of this exponential change that we're seeing.
Totally.
It's just growing and getting so much better.
Yeah.
At an accelerated pace year to year. So
I mean, this is why like companies like Renaissance Periodization are crushing so much, because they have so much data of real people who've had real progress. So now it's like, okay, how do you know that I should take this little deload or whatever? It's like, well, we have 10,000 people in the database in your age range, at your body composition. And you're like, okay, like that pretty good chance it's going to work.
Exactly.
Whatever. I don't know how many they have, but it's an enormous number of people in those databases. So Precision Nutrition, if you're familiar with that company, they had a similar thing from the nutrition. So there's just a lot of companies coming on board with really cool things. But they got to have the good data first.
Exactly. Wow. Well, with that, Andy, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for making this such an incredible discussion. I learned a tremendous amount. You're a massive wealth of knowledge. Yeah. I just love it. I can't wait to have another conversation with you one of these days. And where can people find you? I mean, sounds like you have a few companies and lots of great resources available for people. Can you give us a rundown of some of those?
Yeah, honestly, what I've tried to do my entire career is make things available for anyone, regardless of situation. So where I started and my home base is always free education. What that means, like my podcast, of course, is called Perform. That's 10 episodes in season 1. And it's not a weekly podcast. Like it's just get in, get out. My YouTube channel, there's no paywalls. There's no newsletter to sign up. That is always and always will be free. And I got 10 years or more of videos from exercise, nutrition, to workouts, to samples on there. That's always going to be my baby. Like those will be my cores for sure. Then from there, as step ups, I mentioned the biomolecular athlete. That is if you want to use our tools, you want me to actually teach you, like there's a fee behind that. That's where our in-person seminars are at. So we have one coming up on blood work and genetic testing for performance in Dallas. In August. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but
I think it's after that, but that's okay. I'm sure you're going to do this on a yearly basis.
But then that'll be up on there,
available.
A little bit more expensive, right? Those courses are a little bit, but not a ton. Then you have things like Absolute Rest, where, couple $100, maybe $1,000 version to much more than that. Our blood work company, Vitality Blueprint, same thing, right? Like you want performance, blood work, performance analysis, performance plans from that side of the equation, that's available. These things are in the thousands. And then we have Rapid Health and Performance, which is our full immersion coaching programs, right? This is where, that's not cheap. And I will never, ever feel bad about that, because now you're getting my personal time and I can only do a few of those at a time. So the other ones are available for $1,000, for $500, all the way down to free. And their goal is to give, again, everyone a chance. If they find anything I say interesting or helpful, I don't want it to be behind paywalls. If you want my time, that's behind a paywall. But if you want my information, that try to make that as free and accessible to anybody as I possibly can. Yeah,
and I learned pretty much everything about exercise, not from medical school at all.
Yeah.
I learned it from your YouTube videos.
Oh, amazing.
So I highly respect your content. It's very scientifically based, and the regular person can use it. It's like made for the regular person, which I love. Even though you're a performance coach, you train world famous athletes, regular people can use your information very effectively. So, thank you so much for doing this. This is an incredible conversation, and look forward to many more.
I really appreciate it, man. It's been a blast.
Awesome. Thank you so much.